Husband caught his wife cheating on camera and took immediate revenge, uncovering a deeper betrayal. Tuesday evenings were consistently busy, particularly on the second Tuesday of each month, when I had my Kawas Club meeting from 6:30 onwards. May and I typically didn't get home until around 5 or 5:30. Since Kawas was a dinner gathering, I didn't have to worry about cooking, but May, my wife of 4 years, always had some last-minute tasks she needed me to handle before I could leave. The real challenge, however, was my own struggle. According to May, she was 3 months pregnant and dealing with wild hormones. Despite her pregnancy, she remained the captivating woman I had married, now with the radiant glow of impending motherhood. It was especially difficult for me to tear myself away from her, even for a brief evening. She was perfect to me, standing at 5 feet 3 inches, weighing 110 lbs, with light brown hair and stunning blue eyes. Her physical appearance complimented me, but I cherished her for much more than just her looks. She possessed a sharp wit and keen observational skills, though her beauty certainly didn't hurt. Regardless, I had to be out the door by 6:10 to make it to the meeting on time, which meant rushing through a shower, getting dressed, giving May a quick kiss, and then heading out. I usually didn't return home until after 11, often closer to midnight. Tonight's meeting didn't seem like it would be any different. After a hurried shower, I threw on some slacks and a sports shirt, grabbed my briefcase, and made my way through the kitchen to the garage, planting a kiss on the back of May's neck and giving her a reassuring squeeze to steady her. I reluctantly left her behind and headed out. It was tempting to skip the meeting, not just for May's sake, but also because I had a project underway in the garage. I had been installing a baby monitor for the nursery to be, estimating that it would take me about 30 minutes to finish and then proudly show it off to my wife. She always appreciated my small accomplishments, and I didn't mind soaking in the praise, even if it was somewhat misplaced. After all, I was a guy, and a little ego stroking from my woman didn't hurt. As I settled into the car, I activated the garage door opener and started the engine. While the car purred to life, I placed my briefcase on the seat beside me and double-checked that I had everything I needed. Cell phone, calculator, notebook, all accounted for. Then I reversed out of the garage and down the driveway, waving to May through the kitchen window as she washed dishes. She waved back as I reached the street. Before I could shift the car into gear or even close the garage door with a remote, my cell phone rang, halting all movement. As I answered it, greeting the caller, I glanced up to wave to May one more time, but she had already disappeared from view. The voice on the other end conveyed that I was caught at a good time. The caller informed me that tonight's meeting was canceled. Our president, Patrick, along with Everett and Jules, had been called out of town. With the key officers absent, it was decided to cancel this month's gathering. There was nothing planned for tonight unless I had something urgent. Needless to say, I was relieved to have the evening free. I simply reversed back into the garage, noticing that May's face hadn't reappeared in the kitchen window of our 3-bedroom home. She later admitted she hadn't left the kitchen, anticipating my return to surprise her. If she had been anywhere else, she wouldn't have heard me drive back into the garage. After entering the garage, I finally closed the garage door and then sat in the car, taking a few minutes to relax. I decided to order pizza for dinner tonight, instead of cooking myself, allowing me to focus on finishing the monitor. All aspects regarding the camera and the nursery were completed, except for some garage connections and final testing. The nursery's cosmetic adjustments were minor. The camera, mounted discreetly in a corner, had gone unnoticed by May for 10 days due to its small size. I'd attend to those tasks another time. May had mentioned casually how convenient a nursery monitor would be for checking on the baby while it napped, prompting me to wire the house accordingly. I also opted to install sound monitors in each room. The idea for the visual monitor in the baby's room came from seeing some equipment a friend was discarding. While the main controls were in our bedroom, I installed a secondary set in the garage where I spent a fair amount of time working, complete with speakers and an old TV, acting as the video monitor. This setup allowed for flexible monitoring of the nursery from anywhere in the house. As mentioned, the project was nearly complete, needing only a minor adjustment before I could surprise May and unwind for the night. I decided to try completing the work before relaxing in front of the TV or spending time with May. I stepped out of the car and began checking my work. After about 20 minutes, everything seemed to be functioning properly, so I began testing the sound feeds. Each could be controlled individually, or I could route them all to the 5 second-hand speakers above my workstation. Testing them one by one, starting with the living room, they all worked perfectly, with impressive sensitivity. I could even hear May showering in the master bedroom. I set them all to be live and feeding into the garage, then proceeded to make the final connections for the video monitor. I got somewhat lost in my wiring checks when I heard someone speaking through the living room speaker, sounding like May on the phone. Curious, I turned up the sound and found it to be perfectly clear. The $12 spent on the 5 speakers was indeed a bargain. May conveyed to Roger through the speaker that it would be appreciated if he could be there by 7. My wife's voice affirmed, "It's on, lover." In response, Roger assured May, "Okay, love, I'll see you then. Don't you dare be late. We won't have near enough time as it is, and no, don't figure on getting a repeat." After a brief pause, May giggled and hung up the phone. What was that about? Who was Roger? The only Roger I knew was Roger Jenkins, Crystal's husband. Crystal was May's college roommate and still her best friend. Roger and I got along well. He was a fun guy. I guessed he and May were planning something for Crystal. Well, I'd find out soon enough. It was only 15 minutes until 7. Abandoning speculation, I pressed the camera's on button in the baby's room and reclined with a satisfied smile. The monitor displayed the spare bedroom, where the camera focused on the queen-sized bed, surprisingly made up with turned-down sheets. It was the first time I'd seen May do this without expecting guests. Adjusting the video controls, I zoomed the camera in and out. At the widest zoom, everything in the bedroom was visible, except the corner where the camera was fixed near the ceiling. Leaving it at that setting, I critically examined the clear image, capturing the door, window, closet, and the well-framed bed. Content with my work, I started tidying my workbench, pleased with the sound and picture system I had created. Retrieving a beer from the old refrigerator, I relaxed in my $150 recliner, a garage edition my wife wouldn't allow in the house but fit perfectly in the garage. Almost finishing the beer, contemplating ordering pizza and planning to surprise May, the front doorbell interrupted my thoughts. A moment later, May greeted the visitor and expressed her impatience. She invited Roger to come in, mentioning they had until 10:30 before it was over. May assured him that until then, she was his all the way. The shock didn't come from the words, but from the husky tone in my wife's voice, a sound I only heard in our bedroom or on our way there. It was her closeness, her seductive voice. Choking on the last sip of beer, I sat up abruptly. The front door closed and May's voice continued, informing Roger that, judging by the bulge in his pants, she wasn't the only one who had a hard time. "It looks really good," she said, asking him to come over and give her a real hello. Roger responded, and a few grunts and moans followed. Then May's voice again, directing him not to stay there, but to come back to our room because she had it all set up for them. I felt sick to my stomach. It seemed like May was leading him back to our bedroom. Confused and unsure of what to do, my initial urge was to burst into the kitchen and eject Roger from the house. But what was the reality? I took a deep breath. It couldn't be what it sounded like. May and I were deeply in love, and I was certain she had been as faithful as I had been. While she teased me about admiring other women, I knew it was just harmless looking. I never felt the urge to stray, and we were compatible lovers. She always had everything she desired in our closeness moments. Multiple climaxes were her norm, and I made sure to satisfy her until she indicated otherwise. This had to be a misunderstanding on my part. She was my best friend, and we were expecting a baby together. Sitting in the worn-out lounger, I noticed movement on the baby's room monitor. The door opened, and May gently directed Roger into the room with the prepared bed, maneuvering him to the other side, between the bed and the window. She swayed back to stand in front of the closed closet doors, looking across the bed at Roger and almost directly into the camera. May wore her worn-out Saturday-Sunday morning robe, reaching just mid-thigh. However, her hair was styled in a sophisticated bun atop her head, accentuating her slender throat. With just the right amount of makeup, she resembled a princess, except for the ratty old worn-out robe. On her feet were the high-heeled slippers I had gifted her for her birthday 2 months ago, although she wore them that evening, and I had complimented how they enhanced her legs. I couldn't recall seeing them outside her closet since then. As soon as this thought hit me, I realized I hadn't spotted them out of her closet since then, and I felt like I was on the verge of tears. This couldn't be happening. Across the bed from one of my best friends, my wife stood tall and proud, making direct eye contact. Her hands slowly rose to the robe's throat, and with her left hand she held it closed at the neckline. Using her right hand, she unsnapped each button, allowing the robe to billow out, teasing Roger with glimpses inside. Undoing all the buttons while continuing to hold the robe closed, she brought her right hand back to her throat. Using both hands, she slowly peeled the robe open, standing for a moment to let us admire the vision framed by the robe. Then, she let her hands drop, shrugging her shoulders, allowing the robe to drop and puddle around her feet. She was wearing the lingerie I had given her on Valentine's Day, which she had modeled for me on that special day. Since then, I had not seen it. Still maintaining eye contact with Roger, she raised a hand and gestured for him to come to her. As he turned around the bed, I observed my former friend's stunned face. He stammered that he was expecting to be with May tonight, but she had made it really special for him. He expressed how beautiful she was, mentioning, "God, but you are beautiful." They both disrobed. Suddenly emerging from my dazed depression, I knew I would need proof of the unfolding situation. After a moment of thought, I hastened into the now empty living room, working quietly and quickly. Obtaining a fresh SD card, I returned to the garage, connected it to the monitor, and switched everything back on. The monitor displayed Roger and my wife, and tears welled up as I watched them move to the bed, embracing tightly. They engaged in an act of intimacy that seemed to last forever, with Roger driving into her relentlessly. After about 15 minutes, she attempted to pull away. Staring at the distressing scene on the monitor, I stood up and began pacing. I knew that entering the house would lead to a violent outcome. I felt sick to my stomach and completely unable to decide what to do next. "Roger, unless you want Gary to walk in on us, you have to go now," May said. She bent, picked up his clothes, and handed them to him, gathering the remains of the lingerie she had given him, along with herself. Placing everything on the dresser. I watched as May threw on her old robe and stripped the sheets off the bed, not even waiting for Roger to finish dressing before bundling them up and taking them to the washer in the laundry room between the kitchen and garage. Upon her return to the living room, Roger was present, and with the boastful, melodious tone men often adopt, he greeted her. He expressed that it was great and suggested they talk about doing it again. She replied firmly, stating that she meant it when she said just the once, and only because of their deal. Roger acknowledged her decision, adding, "Perhaps for old time's sake too." He expressed understanding, saying that it was just for once, but if she ever thought about how great it was, maybe they could try it again. I heard the sounds of another sloppy kiss before Roger's footsteps seemed to fade as he went to the door. I could hear the impatience in my wife's voice and the little sounds she was making, but it didn't register at the time. Nor did the exhalation she made when she finally followed him to the door. Literally sick to my stomach, I lay back in the ratty recliner, looking at the now empty bedroom showing on the monitor. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was 10:37. They had stayed to their time schedule very well. I heard Roger murmuring something at the door, and I clearly heard May reply that it was just the one time and only because of their agreement so many years ago. She emphasized that I was her husband, her lover, and the man she wanted in her life. She expressed uncertainty about why they did it now and mentioned that Crystal, despite being okay with this, was her best friend and more important than an affair. She questioned Roger about Crystal's importance to him. I couldn't understand Roger's mumble, but I heard another kiss, and then the door shut quietly. Almost immediately, I heard the lock click home. If I hadn't been so filled with tears and despair, I think the exhaustion in Roger's voice after his session with my wife would have been funny. At the moment, it certainly didn't seem funny at all. After the door shut, May reappeared in the spare bedroom. I couldn't seem to think of it as the baby's room anymore. She quickly went over the room, carefully making sure nothing was amiss after the tryst. Gathering up her clothes, she disappeared into the hall. And I soon heard her in our bedroom. I listened to her shower, and then she was out, and I heard the bed rustle. It sounded like my wife had gone to bed. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was almost 11. I just sat and stared into space. I had no idea where my life and my wife were going from here. I only knew I was heartsick. Thoughts and ideas crowded through my head. In some, I thought of things that would excuse my wife for what she had done. In others, I answered the excuses. And yet, in others, I asked myself what I had done to cause May to need another man. Sometime after midnight, I wearily arose and turned the electronics off. Entering the house through the garage door, I headed directly to the master bedroom. Passing the spare room where my wife had been with Roger, I glanced in. The room was just as I had last seen it Monday evening. The bed was stripped, and nothing seemed out of place. There was nothing to tell that anything had taken place. Groaning to myself, I entered my bedroom. Glancing at my sleeping wife, I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and did my business. Stripping off my clothes and leaving them in the dirty clothes hamper before dropping them in, I glanced in, and the hamper was empty. No soiled lingerie there. When I climbed into bed, my wife rolled over and threw an arm over me. She sleepily asked how my night had been. After a moment's silence, I told her it had been very traumatic, but I would tell her about it later. Usually, she snuggled up to me. Tonight, however, she just lay quietly, pulling her arm back and rolling over with her back to me. She seemed to fall back asleep immediately, though, listening to her breathing. I thought she was still awake. I just rolled away from her, then stared into the darkness. I don't know how much I slept that night. I couldn't remember actually sleeping at all. When the alarm went off, I just lay there. I was certainly in no shape to go to work. Telling May I thought I had the flu, I stayed in bed until I heard her car leave for work. I got up and began carefully opening drawers, being sure not to displace anything as I searched May's dresser. In the bottom drawer, folded and stored in a paper bag and under some sweaters, was the lingerie Roger had enjoyed. I pulled them out, noting the lap of the ruined underwear was still damp. After calling in sick to my boss, I played back the tape I had recorded the previous night. Initially, I fast-forwarded through it, avoiding a rehash of the experience and ensuring the tape's quality. However, as time passed, I began to notice details I had overlooked initially. The morning was spent scrutinizing the video content, and I made 2 duplicate kits along with 2 phone calls. Upon returning home, I realized I hadn't eaten since the previous day's lunch. Missing dinner and feeling queasy about breakfast, I skipped meals. When May arrived at her usual time, around 4:30, she came in to kiss me. I turned away, prompting her to give me a peculiar look. Eventually, at 5:30, I decided to confront the issue head-on. There was no sense in delaying it further, only causing more distress for myself. I asked May if she could spare a few minutes to show her what I had been doing for the baby monitor we were discussing. Her response was to wait until after dinner because she was just about to put it on. I picked up my cell phone and inquired about her dinner preference. She suggested Chinese, and I promptly ordered it for delivery. Then I brought her into the bedroom, demonstrating the controls on the console behind the door. I left the sound on, moving from room to room while communicating with her over the monitor. Although she couldn't respond, the smile on her face upon my return indicated that it was working better than planned. Turning on the video feature, I instructed her to wait and watch. I then stepped into the spare room and stood where she had been the previous night. I grimaced and mimicked a slow bump and grind before returning to our bedroom. She exclaimed, "Gary, that's perfect! When did you get this going?" I responded that I got it going this afternoon, actually, the previous night. She wore a puzzled smile, seemingly trying to recall when I had found time to set it up. I told her there was one more thing to show her and took her hand, leading her to the garage. I explained that since I spend a lot of time there, I thought it was a good idea to have a monitoring station to cover the baby when she has to go out. Then I activated the system in the garage. Recalling something from the night before, I added, "One thing, let me show you how it works." I inserted a USB drive into the TV. "Watch the bedroom and see what happens," I told her. Watching the monitor, we saw the same view as from our bedroom, the initial scene of an empty room, though now the bed was unmade. Then I used the remote to turn on the TV, and the picture immediately changed to show May on her knees before Roger. Glancing at her face, I saw the color drain from it, and she seemed to sway before catching her balance. She looked suddenly at me, and I just stared into her eyes, then pushed fast forward, stopping in just a couple of seconds. I gestured for her to watch the screen again. When she looked back, she saw Roger grabbing at her underwear. Although there was no sound, we could see May say something to him. We both watched, and then heard the small scream she gave, which I now realized was pain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw tears running down May's face, and also noticed the slight cringe when she saw again the rough way Roger had driven himself into her. Stopping the video, I asked if she wanted to see any more. My wife just looked helplessly at me. I requested May to come inside the house. Feeling the need for a serious conversation and uncertainty about where things were headed, I guided her into the kitchen, where I seated her at the kitchen table and took a seat at the end of the table next to her. May mumbled through tears that she could explain, and I responded that I needed an explanation. I asked about the explanation, questioning May about a promise she made to Roger back in college. I wanted to know how many years ago she had promised herself to him. May began to explain, saying it wasn't like that. She and Roger had been dating while he had a reputation as a lady executor. May mentioned that she started rooming with Crystal, and Roger began dating both of them for a while. She elaborated on the dynamics between Crystal, Roger, and herself, mentioning that Roger and Crystal were heading toward a serious relationship. May recounted a conversation with Roger one night in her room where they got more risque as they drank. In that conversation, she revealed to Roger that the only reason they hadn't been intimate was her fear of getting pregnant. May explained Roger's expectation for his partners to be on the pill and mentioned her reluctance to be too liberal with her favors. May continued her explanation, recalling that she and Roger argued, and she wrote a promissory note stating that if she could be sure he couldn't get her pregnant, she would spend an evening in bed with him. When she paused, I was staring incredulously at her. "How long ago was this?" I asked. "About 6 years," was her answer. May went on to tell me that the note was one of the jokes between Roger and her ever since. Then we broke the news of her pregnancy to Roger and Crystal 2 weeks ago, and after the initial congratulations, Roger and I had gone into their garage to look at a problem he was having. Once I was out of the room, Crystal had looked her in the eye and told her the promissory note must now be due. May was shocked that Crystal even knew about it, and stunned to discover that Crystal was taking it seriously. When Roger and I came back, I remembered a case of Dutch beer I had been going to bring to the cookout, insisting it would only take a few minutes to get something special. I left the other 3 there and went home alone to pick up the beer. While I was gone, Crystal had raised the topic of the note again. May was surprised again to find that Roger had apparently believed the note was going to be honored. He was quite indignant to hear May was thinking of welshing on the agreement. This was all taking place after 3 hours of steady drinking, the last she would have until our baby finished breastfeeding. May found herself agreeing to honor the old note before I returned. It had been decided between the 3 of them that she would entertain Roger last night. I expressed to May that her story was one of the strangest I've ever heard, and it was challenging for me to accept. I asked her who the father of the baby she was carrying was. May shrank, and tears began falling down her cheeks again. My next question was about how many other notes were now outstanding and how many she had paid up on to date. May screamed at me saying there were none and pleaded with me, "Gary, don't. I love you, Gary." She assured me that it was a singular instance and wouldn't recur. May pleaded with me to hear her out, acknowledging that trying to explain might sound absurd, but she felt obligated to do so. She emphasized that it wasn't planned or desired, and she had never been unfaithful to me. May pleaded with me to believe her. She dropped to her knees in tears, covering her face. I asked May if I could ask her some questions, and if she would be honest. She responded affirmatively, urging me to ask her. May emphasized that it was a one-time thing and not something she wanted to do. She admitted that doing it seemed incredible to her now, but I was worth more to her than life. I gazed at her kneeling before me, my heart aching and my stomach in knots. This was my best friend, the person I wanted beside me for life, but I had to know if she was who I thought she was. I asked May if she could have said no to this. She replied that she could have, but she felt her honor was involved. May explained that she was afraid to tell me, fearing that I wouldn't understand. She expressed that she felt if I were in her place, I would do the same thing. She clarified that when the agreement was made, she was drunk, but when she was sober, she didn't throw it out. When it was made, she didn't know me, and it wasn't something she did to cheat on me. It was something she promised to a friend so dear at the time in that place, and she believed it was right. After pondering, I responded that she could have said no after sobering up, but felt it was right and owed a debt to the man her friend became over these years. I asked if that was correct, and she affirmed it. I asked her to think carefully if this was something she was looking forward to, and she replied with a shout that after a while, she began thinking it wasn't real, just a joke. However, she realized it wasn't a joke, it was real. Staring into her eyes, I inquired about the past 2 weeks, whether she was looking forward to it. May took a deep breath and answered that she wasn't. She explained it was something she felt she had to do out of obligation, not pleasure. I continued to look at her, and May, looking down at the table, whispered, "Okay, yes, Gary, I guess I was looking forward to it, but not in the way you might be thinking." She clarified that she had never thought of cheating on me, never wanted to. However, all of a sudden, this situation was there. She felt she had to go through with it, and if she did, she saw no reason not to enjoy it. She stressed that she never felt it was something she had to do because I was not enough for her. It was something she had to honor, so she rationalized that she might as well make it special because nothing like it would ever happen again. Taking a shuddering breath, I let it out slowly. I brought up a memory about 6 weeks ago when I called May on my cell phone while driving back from a conference. We teased for a few minutes, and then I asked her to meet me at the Holiday Inn in Atherton. I suggested making it a weekend away from home, maybe having some fun. I asked if she remembered, and she responded affirmatively, mentioning it was a great weekend with a tremulous smile. I then questioned if she wanted to make that a great weekend for us, for me. May expressed, "What a question." Of course I did, and it was. We had a great time, giving me a genuine smile this time. I followed up by asking if she recalled what she packed for that weekend. She mentioned taking a nice dress in case we wanted to go dancing, which we did, and some comfortable clothes to walk in. I told her to wait a minute, explaining that I needed to turn the video on again to help her understand what this question was about. I turned and walked back to our bedroom, checking midway down the hall to ensure she was following me and she was still there. I powered up the bedroom TV and pressed play on the remote. The scene unfolded with May still kneeling before Roger. She rose and turned to the bed, facing the camera in the corner, capturing her actions. I inquired about what she was wearing, and blushing, May replied that she had on her white lingerie, the set from Valentine's Day. She mentioned that I had never seen her wear it for me except when she modeled it after I gave it to her. May explained that there had been no place to wear it and then paused, looking confused. I reminded her that she didn't wear it at the Holiday Inn. She changed into a peasant skirt and a white blouse. Later, she wore white cotton underwear and a bra, probably the same ones she had on now. I asked if she recalled what she wore to bed that night, and in a small voice she replied that she wore her Donald Duck t-shirt. Looking into her eyes, I questioned May about the holiday weekend, stating that she mentioned it was special, and the date with Roger wasn't. Yet I pointed out that she wore one of the handsomest things she owned, something I bought for us to share, with Roger, not for me. I inquired how special she thought she was placing me. May slumped her shoulders and just looked at me. I continued, expressing that if I didn't love her, we wouldn't be living in this house together. I emphasized that if I didn't think she was something special to me, I wouldn't be married to her. I recounted an unexpected call that canceled my meeting the previous night, leading me into one of the worst nightmares I could conceive. Roger, one of my best friends, if not my very best friend, showed up when I should have been in my meeting. My woman, May, greeted him at the door and took him to a room she had gone to some trouble preparing for a tryst, giving him a strip tease. I observed that she dressed her body to display something she hadn't done for me in well over a year. When I questioned her about it, she claimed the meeting wasn't important to her, but she'd gone to a lot of trouble dressing, putting up her hair, and applying makeup, something she hadn't done for me since Hector was a pup. This indicated to me that the meeting was crucial to her, considering it a treat she had to prepare for. It also suggested that her time with me was ordinary and of much lesser value. I saw her doing things for Roger that she only did for me on special occasions, if then, and doing some things for him that she had refused to do with and for me. Tears welled up in my wife's eyes, and she blinked them away. She insisted that it wasn't like that, and expressed her love for me, emphasizing how much I meant to her. Seating myself on the bed, I gazed at her and stated that I wasn't sure yet what steps we could take. However, I mentioned that I planned to call Roger and Crystal, asking them to come over that evening. I questioned May about Crystal's awareness of the situation and then proceeded to dial their number. Crystal answered, and I requested their presence for a brief meeting that evening. While I was on the call, May handled the Chinese food delivery at the door. Despite having no appetite, I forced myself to eat, anticipating a lengthy and emotional night ahead. May idly toyed with her food, and for a moment, I almost believed her reassurances that it was a one-time occurrence and that she still loved me. Around 7:15, the doorbell rang. Before opening the door, I told May that I suspected there was more to this situation than she realized. As I welcomed Roger and Crystal inside, both flashed smiles at me. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that each of them shared a subtle, knowing smile with May. Roger especially seemed possessive in his gaze toward my wife, and I noticed May cringe slightly upon encountering it. As we all settled on the couch, I gestured for May to join them, pointing to the couch beside Crystal, but she opted for her recliner to the side. I rambled on about various topics, including the new monitoring system I had been developing. I refrained from disclosing its functionality or what had happened the previous night. Crystal and Roger appeared puzzled, questioning why they were summoned. Eventually, I broached the topic, jokingly offering drinks to lighten the mood. Everyone accepted, and I served each of them their preferred beverages: Crystal's white wine, Roger's Jack Daniels and 7-Up, May's orange juice due to her pregnancy, and what looked like my gin and tonic, but was pure tonic. I settled onto a hassock near the TV, needing to maintain some semblance of composure. Surveying everyone, I finally asked Crystal what her motivation was in setting up the situation. She appeared puzzled and inquired about what I meant. I clarified my question, asking why she had worked so hard to arrange everything. As I finished speaking, Roger sputtered and choked on his drink. Turning my gaze to him, I continued, acknowledging that I understood what he gained from it, but questioning if there was more to it. Attempting to focus on both women simultaneously, I switched my eyes back and forth. Addressing Roger, I expressed my concern about his reputation as a playboy, suggesting that one more conquest didn't seem worth the risk. He stumbled in his response, explaining that he was at home the previous night when my meeting was called off. He mentioned being in the garage during my appointment with May, and when I arrived to support his claim, he turned on the TV to show the live feed from the camera in the spare room, which I had just finished setting up before he came over. I remarked on the quality of the picture, pointing out the timing of its installation. May had her face buried in her hands, and Roger's face went pale. Crystal looked at me with a seductive smile. Continuing, I questioned the purpose of the whole situation. Crystal crossed her legs, and her foot began bouncing up and down. She asked what I thought it meant. I replied, mentioning her reputation and Roger's, noting that despite them being straightforward with us, I had received some comments at the last social gathering. I expressed relief that they hadn't said anything to us, but I anticipated that was about to change. Crystal confirmed that this wasn't the ideal way to bring it up, but agreed that it was time to address the matter. I glanced over at my puzzled wife, May. Up to now, I thought she was aware of this, but now I'm not so sure. May's friend and her husband, Roger, had been involved in a key club for the past couple of years. They met on Friday nights at Barney's Broiler. A group of them gathered in a back room for dinner, where each couple brought a house key with their address on it. They dropped the keys into a barrel similar to the ones used in bingo games. After dinner, the wives left and went to their own homes to get ready for some closeness time with a partner other than their usual one. Meanwhile, the husbands drew a key. As per the rules, each guy got to look at the address. If it was his own, he held it in his left hand, pulled out another key, and dropped his wife's key back into the barrel. Some guys might check out an address, and if it was with someone they had recently been with or didn't like, they'd draw another key. However, they could only draw twice. If they pulled their wife's key the second time, they were out of luck. The guys then had a drink before heading off for the weekend rendezvous. It wasn't just for a couple of hours or a night, it was the entire weekend. Crystal and Roger, being close to us, led others in the key club to believe we were involved in swapping with them on the side. Many other guys expressed interest in May, not just Roger. As I shared these details, the room fell silent, and I carefully observed each of my companions. May was gaping at me, clearly surprised and shocked. Crystal wore a simpering smile, her foot bouncing anxiously. Roger looked smug and somewhat relieved after hearing my description. Before we proceed any further, May, there's something you should know about your lover from last night, I said. May's face paled once again as I recounted the situation, and it was evident she didn't want to be reminded of the delicate state of our marriage. I mentioned that Roger was well endowed, and her face turned completely red. She buried her face in her hands, stealing a glance at Roger, whose smug look remained, accompanied by one of the biggest grins I had ever seen. I felt the need to address the condescending look he had given me before the night was over. I shared my understanding that Roger was considered the prize at these drawings. All the wives anxiously awaited to see if they had drawn the highly regarded partner for the weekend, akin to the way it worked for college co-eds, as you described. Glancing at everyone's faces once more, I added that May had already experienced the best. Roger was smirking at me, and when I looked at Crystal, she was smirking at May, who seemed to be sinking into her chair, looking at me a little sickly. Leaning back on my hassock, I took a long drink of my tonic, pretty bitter, but that's what my mouth tasted like anyway. Then I sat and let the silence build. Roger still looked very satisfied with himself, but it seemed to me that Crystal wanted to say something. I kept quiet, allowing the tension to build some more. Crystal began by explaining that their arrangement was a good deal, adding spice to marriages to keep the love alive. According to her, it prevented staleness and tiredness from setting in. She suggested that loosening up could bring a boost to our relationship, making us closer. Roger, in response, just grinned his usual grin. She continued, expressing the belief that it wouldn't affect our friendship and that it could introduce new ideas for the bedroom. Crystal assured us there was no pressure, urging us to think about it and stating that they would be there whenever we made up our minds. In response to this introduction and confession, I appreciated Crystal's patience, but made it clear that I hadn't discussed this with May and had no intention of doing so. I expressed disinterest in swapping or seeking another partner for lovemaking. I highlighted that May and I were intelligent, well-read, and imaginative individuals who didn't need unconventional methods to improve our intimate life. I shared my hope for enjoying our life together for many more years. However, my tone changed as I addressed a more serious concern. I pointed out that Roger didn't practice safe sex, and this troubled me. I emphasized that May, now pregnant with our child, would need to visit the doctor to check for STDs, creating a difficult situation for both of us. I explained that we couldn't engage in intimate activities until she was checked and proved negative to prevent any potential transmission between us. I made sure May understood the gravity of the situation. Looking at our former best friends, I expressed a sense of betrayal, uncertain about which of them had angered me more. Regardless, I conveyed that we would have to halt our gatherings for the foreseeable future. I powered off the TV, ejected the USB drive, and handed it to May. She crumpled several sheets of today's unopened newspaper, lit a match, and set them ablaze in the fireplace. After adding the drive to the pile, we stood together watching the fire consume and burn, until only black ash remained where the thumb drive had been. Turning around, I observed that both Roger and Crystal were now unconscious. I remarked that the chemical had worked before making a phone call to Lopez. 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., the doorbell rang. Welcoming Lopez, I pointed to the two limp bodies and confirmed that the package was ready. Lopez inquired if I had something for him, and I gestured toward the two individuals on the floor. Lopez went outside and returned with 7 more men. They picked up Crystal, and as they moved toward Roger, I asked them to halt. Retrieving a baseball bat from upstairs, I stated that I needed just a few swings. Lopez nodded and Roger was placed on the ground. I explained my plan to target specific points, kneecaps, ankles, and the two sensitive areas, all done in a few swift moves. May stood there, mouth agape. I expressed a desire to hear screams, but acknowledged that Roger was unconscious. The group took him away, and Lopez returned to sit with me after 5 minutes, thanking me for the samples. I responded that it was my pleasure. May remained seated, her mouth still open. After Lopez left, the night was cold, and May approached me, asking what would happen to our former friends. I responded in a cold, flat voice that they were going to Mexico to help some medical students practice. May questioned what would occur if someone looked for them, and I assured her that Lopez would handle it. I coldly mentioned that she had eliminated them, expressing my indifference to her feelings. I argued that I had no right to be judged and emphasized that I had ensured their usefulness to society. May was visibly shaken. I informed her that my earlier promise about us returning and having a physical relationship was a lie. The next morning, we would conduct a DNA test for the unborn child, and if the results showed I was the father, I would assist with the birth. However, we would not remain married. She wouldn't take any lovers until our son was 10 years old, or I would ensure she became very useful. We would file for divorce in the evening, with her getting the house and my financial support until she found a job. May nodded, expressing surprise at discovering this side of me, and I walked away, stating that I didn't know it either. The following day, we filed for divorce, and 3 weeks later, we received the DNA report confirming I was the father. Months later, we finalized the divorce, and 2 months after that, my son was born. I spent a lot of time with him, maintaining occasional conversations with May. However, I could never love her again. She adhered to the agreement, refraining from taking any lovers, and I supported her financially for 5 years until our son could care for himself. I didn't date during this time, channeling all my energy into my son. Lopez expressed his gratitude with a significant thank you gift, and no one came looking for the 2 samples I had sent.
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. Jake Morrison, a dedicated 38-year-old middle school math teacher, pulled his car into the pickup lane at Oak Ridge Middle School. The crisp autumn air nipped at his face as he scanned the crowd of chattering preteens for his son. Ethan, his son, trudged towards the car, head down, shoulders slumped. Jake's brow furrowed. This wasn't like his usually talkative and exuberant son. "Hey, buddy," Jake called as Ethan climbed into the passenger seat. "How was school?" Ethan mumbled something unintelligible and turned to stare out the window. In the rear-view mirror, Jake caught a glimpse of reddened eyes and tear-stained cheeks. His concern deepened. The drive home was uncharacteristically quiet. Normally, Ethan would be regaling Jake with tales of his day. Who said what in homeroom, the latest middle school drama, his triumphs and tribulations in pre-algebra. Today, nothing. Jake pulled into the driveway of their modest suburban home. Before Ethan could bolt for his room, Jake placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "Hey," he said softly. "What's going on, kiddo? You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Ethan's lower lip trembled. For a moment, Jake thought he might open up, but then the boy shook his head and darted inside. Jake sighed, following his son into the house. He found Ethan curled up on the living room couch, looking small and vulnerable. "Ethan," Jake said, sitting beside him, "please tell me what's wrong. I can't help if I don't know what's going on." Finally, Ethan broke down. Through his tears, he revealed the cruel taunts he'd been enduring at school. Kids calling him the milkman son, saying he didn't look like Jake. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He struggled to keep his face neutral, not wanting to betray the sudden, irrational surge of doubt that flooded his mind. "Who's saying these things?" he managed to ask. "It started with Tommy Peterson," Ethan sniffled. He said he heard his dad talking about our family, And then he told everyone, and now they won't stop. Jake's mind raced. Mr. Peterson, their next-door neighbor. The guy was always a bit of a blowhard, but this was crossing a line. Struggling to maintain his composure, Jake pulled Ethan into a fierce hug. "Listen to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't care what anyone says. You are my son. I love you more than anything in this world. Nothing will ever change that. You understand?" Ethan nodded against Jake's chest, his sobs slowly subsiding. "I'm going to take care of this," Jake promised, his mind already formulating plans to address the situation with the school and possibly confront Mr. Peterson. "Those kids won't bother you anymore." As he held his son, Jake couldn't shake the growing sense of unease that settled in the pit of his stomach. He had some serious questions for Sarah when she got home. The evening dragged on interminably. Jake sat at the kitchen table, a stack of ungraded math tests before him. He glanced at the clock for what felt like the 100th time. 11:47 p.m. Sarah's work meeting was running late. Again. Finally, the front door creaked open. Jake's head snapped up as Sarah stumbled in, her designer clothes slightly askew. Even from across the room, Jake could smell the unmistakable mix of expensive cologne and alcohol. Sarah, a 36-year-old freelance graphic designer, kicked off her heels with a groan. "Hey, honey," she slurred. "Sorry I'm late. Big project? You know how it is." Jake set down his pen deliberately. "We need to talk." Something in his tone must have cut through Sarah's inebriated haze. She paused, one hand on the banister. "What's wrong?" Jake stood, crossing his arms. "There are rumors going around Ethan's school. Rumors about our family." Sarah's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind where kids are calling our son the milkman's kid," Jake said, his voice low and controlled. "The kind where Tommy Peterson is telling everyone Ethan doesn't look like me because he overheard his father talking about us." Sarah laughed, the sound brittle and forced. "That's ridiculous. Kids say stupid things all the time. Don't tell me you're actually worried about this." Jake studied his wife's face, the woman he'd loved for 15 years, the mother of his child. She'd never looked more like a stranger. "I want the truth, Sarah. All of it." Sarah's demeanor shifted abruptly. The mask of drunken dismissiveness fell away, replaced by a cold, calculating look that sent a chill down Jake's spine. "The truth." Sarah's lips curled into a sneer. "You want the truth, Jake? Fine. Let me show you the truth." She stormed past him, heading for her home office. Jake followed, a sense of dread growing with each step. Sarah yanked open the drawer of her sleek, modern desk. The lock clicked open. Jake hadn't even known there was a lock. She pulled out a manila folder and thrust it at his chest. "There's your precious truth," she spat. "Happy now?" Jake's hands trembled as he opened the folder. His eyes scanned the contents, struggling to make sense of the medical jargon. But 3 words stood out in stark relief. Negative paternity match. The room spun. Jake gripped the edge of the desk to steady himself. "How long?" he managed to choke out. Sarah laughed, the sound devoid of any warmth. "How long have I known? Or how long have you been living a lie?" Jake's knuckles whitened on the desk. "Both." "I've known since before Ethan was born," Sarah said, her voice dripping with disdain. "As for you, well, let's just say your whole life has been a lie, Jake. You're shooting blanks. You couldn't father a child if your life depended on it." The words hit Jake like physical blows. He staggered back, collapsing into Sarah's ergonomic office chair. Jake's mind reeled as he struggled to process Sarah's cruel revelation. But the nightmare was far from over. "Who?" he whispered, dreading the answer. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Does it matter? It could be any number of men. I have a thriving business, you know, much more lucrative than your pathetic teacher's salary." Jake's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" A cruel smile played across Sarah's lips. "Oh, honey, did you really think my graphic design business was doing that well? You never questioned where all the money was coming from." As Sarah spoke, the pieces started falling into place. The late nights, the business trips, the designer clothes and exotic vacations that always seemed just a bit out of their price range. Jake couldn't bring himself to say it. An escort, Sarah finished for him. A damn good one, too. High-end clients, very exclusive. Your neighbor, Mr. Peterson, he's small potatoes compared to some of the men I've been with. Jake felt like he might be sick. How many? Sarah shrugged, examining her manicured nails. I lost count years ago, but don't worry, I've always been very careful. Well, except for that one time. She gestured vaguely towards the DNA results still clutched in Jake's hand. You've been lying to me for our entire marriage, Jake said, his voice hollow. Stealing from our accounts. Cheating with God knows how many men. Please, Sarah scoffed. I haven't stolen a dime. Every penny I've earned. Unlike you, with your sad little paychecks. Do you have any idea how boring it's been playing house with you all these years? As the argument escalated, Sarah's drunken state seemed to fuel her cruelty. She boasted about her successful business, mocking Jake's modest teacher salary and the life they'd built together. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but a small sound from the hallway stopped him cold. Both he and Sarah turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway, eyes wide with shock and brimming with tears. Mom! Ethan's voice was barely audible. Dad! Before either of them could react, Ethan turned and fled. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house. Ethan, Jake called, springing to his feet. He glared at Sarah, who had the decency to look slightly ashamed as the gravity of her drunken confessions sank in. We're not finished, Jake growled. Torn between comforting his son and dealing with his wife, Jake made his choice. He raced after Ethan, leaving Sarah alone in the house, her carefully constructed web of lies unraveling around her. As Jake's footsteps faded into the night, Sarah collapsed onto the couch, the full weight of her actions crashing down around her. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there would be no going back. The pale light of dawn crept through the windows as Sarah stirred on the couch, groaning softly. Her eyes fluttered open. Confusion etched across her face as she struggled to piece together the events of the previous night. Jake, who had spent the night consoling a distraught Ethan, watched from the kitchen doorway. His expression was carefully neutral, betraying none of the turmoil within. Morning, he said evenly. Rough night. Sarah winced, pressing a hand to her forehead. God, my head. What happened? Jake's grip on his coffee mug tightened imperceptibly. You had a bit too much at your work thing. I got you some water and aspirin. As Sarah mumbled her thanks and shuffled to the bathroom, Jake's mind raced. Her memory lapse was unexpected, but it could work to his advantage. He needed time to gather evidence, to build an ironclad case. Once he heard the shower running, Jake sprang into action. He moved swiftly through the house, gathering bank statements, credit card bills, and Sarah's laptop. Anything that might hold a clue to the extent of her deception. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Melissa Chun, the private investigator he'd contacted in the early hours of the morning. Can meet at 2 p.m. Discrete location sent separately. Bring all relevant documents. Jake exhaled slowly. It was really happening. He was investigating his own wife, the mother of his child. By the time Sarah emerged, dressed for another day of her graphic design work, Jake had his game face on. He played the role of concerned but oblivious husband perfectly, asking about her plans for the day and mentioning offhand that Ethan wasn't feeling well and would stay home from school. As soon as Sarah left, Jake was on the phone with his college friend and lawyer, Michael Reeves. Mike, I need your help, Jake said, his voice tight. It's about divorce proceedings and securing custody of Ethan. Michael's response was immediate and supportive. I'm here for you, Jake. Let's meet and go over everything. Over the next few days, Jake worked tirelessly. He met with Melissa, providing her with every scrap of information he could find on Sarah's activities. The private investigator set to work tracking Sarah's movements and compiling a client list. Jake also began setting up hidden cameras and audio devices around the house, his stomach churning at the necessity of such deception. But he needed evidence, and this was the only way to get it. In between his clandestine activities, Jake had several recorded conversations with Sarah, where she unwittingly admitted to her actions while sober. Each admission was like a knife to his heart. But Jake steeled himself, knowing it was all necessary for what was to come. Simultaneously, Jake opened a separate bank account and began quietly transferring his legitimate earnings. He couldn't risk Sarah emptying their joint accounts once she realized he was onto her. As the evidence mounted, Jake felt a sense of purpose settling over him. Jake arrived at Oak Ridge Middle School on Monday morning to find the parking lot abuzz with activity. Teachers huddled in small groups, their faces etched with concern. As he approached the main entrance, he spotted Principal Evelyn Walsh, engaged in a heated discussion with Superintendent Richard Grayson. "Jake," Evelyn called, beckoning him over. "We need to talk." Jake's stomach dropped as Evelyn outlined the crisis. Severe budget cuts across the district threatened everyone's job security. Programs were on the chopping block, teaching positions in jeopardy. "We need to show improvement in our test scores," Evelyn explained, her eyes darting nervously to Superintendent Grayson. "Significant improvement. Quickly." Jake's brow furrowed. "But the quarterly assessments aren't for another month. How can we possibly? We need you to adjust some of the data from last year," Grayson cut in, his voice low and urgent. "Nothing drastic, just enough to show an upward trend." Jake stared at them, uncomprehending. "You want me to falsify student records?" Evelyn winced at his blunt phrasing. "Think of it as creative data interpretation. For the good of the school, Jake. For your students." Jake's mind reeled. Was this really happening? First Sarah's betrayal, and now this? "I can't do that," he said firmly. "It's wrong. It's illegal, and it does nothing to actually help our students." Grayson's face darkened. "Mr. Morrison, I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. Your job, everyone's jobs, are on the line here." Jake straightened, meeting the superintendent's gaze unflinchingly. "Then fire me, but I won't be part of this." He turned on his heel and strode into the building, leaving a sputtering Grayson and a conflicted Evelyn in his wake. As he reached his classroom, Jake's hand shook slightly as the full impact of what he'd done hit him. He'd just put his career on the line. With everything else going on in his personal life, he might have just committed professional suicide. Meanwhile, Sarah, completely unaware of Jake's knowledge, continued her deception. She breezily informed Jake of a weekend business trip to meet a new, high-profile client. "It's a potentially huge account," she gushed. "If I land this, we could be looking at a serious upgrade to our lifestyle." Jake nodded, keeping his expression neutral even as his mind raced. This was exactly the kind of lead Melissa had been waiting for. As soon as Sarah left, Jake contacted Melissa. Within hours, she had a startling update. "Jake, we've identified Sarah's new client," Melissa said. "It's Victor Rossi. On the surface, he's a charismatic businessman, but my sources say he's got ties to a dangerous criminal organization. Money laundering, extortion, you name it." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "Are you saying Sarah's involved with the mob?" "I don't think she knows," Melissa replied. "Rossi's careful about keeping his less savory activities under wraps." "But Jake, this complicates things. Exposing Sarah's activities could potentially put her in harm's way." Jake sat heavily in his chair, the weight of this new information crushing down on him. He was faced with a moral dilemma he never could have anticipated. How could he protect Ethan and seek justice without potentially endangering Sarah's life? As he grappled with this impossible situation, Jake realized that the stakes had just gotten exponentially higher. Whatever he decided to do next would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Over the next few days, Jake threw himself into formulating a plan. He knew he needed to expose Sarah's activities, not just to their family and community, but to the authorities as well. But he had to do it in a way that wouldn't tip off Rossi or his criminal associates. After careful consideration, Jake decided to start by anonymously tipping off Detective Laura Hawkins, an ambitious local cop he'd read about in the paper. He crafted a carefully worded email hinting at Sarah's connection to Councilman James Hartford's recent scandal. Next, Jake focused on protecting Ethan from the impending fallout. He called his parents, spinning a tale about a special grandfather-grandson project that would require Ethan to stay with them for a while. It wasn't a complete lie. Jake did want Ethan to spend more time with his grandparents, especially now. As Jake worked, he discovered that Sarah and Victor were planning to attend a high-profile charity gala. Many of Sarah's clients would be present, making it the perfect opportunity to expose her double life. Jake spent hours preparing a digital presentation, compiling irrefutable evidence of Sarah's activities. Financial records, recorded conversations, client lists, everything Melissa had uncovered went into the file. All the while, Jake continued to play the role of oblivious husband. He nodded absently when Sarah mentioned the gala, feigning disinterest in the boring charity thing. He even helped her pick out a dress, swallowing his disgust as she preened in front of the mirror. "You sure you don't want to come?" Sarah asked, adjusting her jewelry. "It could be fun." Jake shook his head, forcing a rueful smile. "You know those fancy parties aren't my scene. Besides, I've got a stack of tests to grade. You go, have a good time." As Sarah left for the gala, Jake felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Anger, certainly. Grief for the life he thought he'd had. But mostly, a determination to see this through to the end. He checked his watch. In just a few hours, he would set his plan in motion. Sarah's carefully constructed world of lies and deceit would come crashing down around her, and Jake would be there to witness every moment of it. The Grand Plaza Hotel gleamed like a jewel in the night, its facade awash with twinkling lights and the constant flash of camera bulbs. Oak Ridge's elite streamed through the doors, decked out in their finest for the annual community charity gala. Jake Morrison adjusted his tie, feeling distinctly out of place in his rented tuxedo. As he approached the entrance, he felt the weight of the concealed recording device pressing against his chest. The grand ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and polished shoes. Jake's eyes scanned the crowd, finally landing on Sarah. She looked stunning in a form-fitting red dress, her hair swept up in an elegant updo. With practiced casualness, Jake began to mingle. He recognized many of the attendees from Sarah's client list, men who had no idea their dirty little secrets were about to be aired in the most public way possible. "Jake, is that you?" He turned to see Margaret Chun, wife of the police chief, eyeing him with surprise. "Mrs. Chun." Jake greeted her warmly. "Lovely event, isn't it?" "Indeed," she replied, her gaze drifting to where Sarah stood, laughing with a group of men. "Though I must say, I'm surprised to see you here without your wife." Jake leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I'm a bit surprised myself. There have been some strange goings-on lately, but I'm sure it's nothing." He moved on before Margaret could press for details, knowing he'd planted a seed of curiosity that would soon bloom into full-blown scandal. Across the room, Jake spotted Councilman James Hartford, his florid face flushed with what looked like more than just alcohol. Sarah was at his elbow, whispering something that made the councilman's eyes dart nervously around the room. A ripple went through the crowd as a new arrival commanded everyone's attention. Victor Rossi strode into the ballroom, his powerful presence drawing all eyes. Jake watched as Sarah's face lit up, her body language shifting subtly as she excused herself from Hartford and made her way towards Rossi. Jake's jaw clenched. It was time to accelerate his plan. He made his way to where Timothy Walsh, a local journalist known for his salacious exposés, was hovering near the bar. "Mr. Walsh," Jake said, clapping the man on the shoulder. "Just the person I wanted to see. I've got a story that might interest you. It involves a certain councilman, a high-end escort ring, and enough blackmail material to keep you in headlines for months." Walsh's eyes gleamed with interest. Is that so, Mr. Morrison? And where might one find evidence of such outrageous claims? Jake smiled tightly. Oh, I think you'll find it's about to become very public indeed. As Jake worked the room, dropping calculated hints and innuendos, he could see the atmosphere beginning to shift. Whispers and suspicious glances spread like wildfire. More than once, he caught Sarah's eye across the room, her confident smile faltering slightly as she noticed a strange undercurrent in the crowd. Jake checked his watch. It was almost time. He made his way towards the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd uncovered, it all came down to this moment. As he climbed the steps to the podium, Jake caught sight of a familiar face near the back of the room. Detective Laura Hawkins, dressed to blend in with the crowd, gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Jake took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. Sarah's world was about to come crashing down around her, and he was the one holding the wrecking ball. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake's voice rang out across the ballroom. If I could have your attention, please. The crowd quieted, all eyes turning towards the stage. Jake could see Sarah in the back, her brow furrowed in confusion. As you know, this gala is all about charity and community, Jake continued, his finger hovering over the remote in his pocket. So in that spirit, I'd like to make an announcement about a significant donation. He pressed a button. The large screen behind him flickered to life, displaying a series of damning financial records and transcripts. My wife, Sarah Morrison, has been running quite a charitable organization of her own, Jake said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. Though I don't think the IRS would approve of her particular brand of giving. A gasp rippled to the crowd as the implications of Jake's words and the evidence on the screen sank in. For years, Sarah has been operating as a high-end escort, servicing many of the fine gentlemen in this very room, Jake continued, his eyes scanning the sea of shocked faces. But that's not all. She's also been embezzling funds, blackmailing clients, and generally making a mockery of everything this community stands for. The screen changed, now playing a recorded confession from Sarah herself. Her voice, slightly slurred but unmistakable, filled the stunned silence of the ballroom. Jake watched as Sarah's face drained of color. She turned, trying to push her way through the crowd towards the exit, but found her path blocked by shocked and angry attendees. Suddenly, a commotion near the bar drew everyone's attention. Victor Rossi, his face contorted with rage, was shoving people aside as he made his way toward Sarah. "You stupid bitch," he snarled, grabbing Sarah's arm roughly. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The mask of the charming businessman was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Sarah's eyes widened in fear as she realized the true nature of the man she'd been dealing with. Just as Rossi raised his hand, another figure burst through the crowd. Detective Laura Hawkins, badge now prominently displayed, inserted herself between Rossi and Sarah. "That's enough," Hawkins barked, her hand on her concealed weapon. "Victor Rossi, you're under arrest for assault, racketeering, and a whole host of other charges will be sorting out down at the station." As Hawkins cuffed the sputtering Rossi, Jake's attention was drawn to a commotion near the buffet table. Councilman Hartford had collapsed, clutching his chest. People were shouting for a doctor, the stress of the evening apparently too much for the politician's heart. In the chaos that followed, Jake made his way down from the stage. He found Sarah standing alone, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "Jake," she whispered, reaching out to him. "Please, I can explain." Jake stepped back, out of her reach. "Save it for your lawyer, Sarah. It's over." As the police began to arrive in force, Jake felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The truth was out. Justice would be served. And though the road ahead would be difficult, he knew he'd made the right choice. For Ethan, for himself, and for all the other victims of Sarah's deception. The weeks following the gala passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media frenzy, and emotional turmoil. Jake found himself at the center of a storm, but he weathered it with a strength he didn't know he possessed. Sarah faced a barrage of charges: fraud, blackmail, tax evasion. The evidence Jake had gathered, combined with the testimony of her former clients, left little room for doubt. As he sat in the courtroom, watching his wife of 15 years being led away in handcuffs, Jake felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Anger, still simmering beneath the surface. But mostly, a profound sadness for what might have been. The family court case was next. Jake presented his evidence methodically, painting a clear picture of Sarah's unfit parenting and financial misconduct. When the judge awarded him full custody of Ethan, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They could start to heal now, to rebuild their life together. Surprisingly, Jake managed to protect most of their assets from Sarah's creditors. His foresight in opening separate accounts and documenting every transaction paid off, ensuring that he and Ethan wouldn't be left destitute by Sarah's crimes. But the repercussions of that fateful night weren't confined to Jake's personal life. The scandal had sent shockwaves through the entire community, toppling pillars of society like dominoes. Superintendent Richard Grayson was one of the first to fall. His involvement in the data falsification scheme came to light during the investigation into Sarah's activities. Jake found himself hailed as a whistleblower, his refusal to compromise his integrity now seen as an act of heroism rather than insubordination. The school board, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, approached Jake with an offer he never saw coming. "We'd like you to consider taking on the role of Vice Principal of Curriculum Development," Board President Elaine Hodges said, her eyes serious behind horn-rimmed glasses. "Your dedication to educational integrity is exactly what this district needs right now." Jake was stunned. I don't know what to say." Elaine smiled. "Say yes, Jake. Help us rebuild trust in this community." After careful consideration, Jake accepted the position. It would be a challenge, but one he was ready to face head-on. As the dust began to settle, Jake found himself with an unexpected calling. He started a support group for other victims of infidelity and financial abuse, using his own experience to help others rebuild their lives. Their first meeting was held in the community center, a small group of shell-shocked individuals drawn together by shared pain. As Jake looked around the room, he saw reflections of his own journey. The anger, the confusion, the tentative hope for a better future. "I know it feels like the world has ended," Jake said, his voice soft but firm. "But I promise you, there is life after betrayal. We're going to get through this together." The hardest part of all was helping Ethan come to terms with the truth about his parentage. The boy had been devastated by the revelations at the gala, withdrawing into himself in a way that broke Jake's heart. On the recommendation of Ethan's school counselor, they started seeing a family therapist. Dr. Amelia Rodriguez, a kind-faced woman with a gentle manner, helped them navigate the treacherous waters of their new reality. "Ethan," she said in one of their sessions, "can you tell me how you're feeling about everything that's happened?" Ethan, slumped in his chair, shrugged. "I don't know. Confused, I guess. Angry. Sad." He looked up at Jake, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't even know if I should call you Dad anymore." Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He leaned forward, taking Ethan's hands in his own. "Listen to me, Ethan. I have been your father every day since you were born. I've loved you, cared for you, watched you grow. Biology doesn't change that. As far as I'm concerned, you are my son in every way that matters." Slowly, painstakingly, they began to rebuild their relationship. There were setbacks. Days when Ethan would lash out in anger, nights when Jake would lie awake wondering if he was doing enough. But there were victories, too. The first time Ethan laughed freely again. The day he asked Jake for help with his math homework, just like old times. As summer turned to fall, Jake made a decision. They needed a fresh start, away from the whispers and sidelong glances of a town that knew too much of their business. They found a modest house in a nearby town, close enough that Jake could commute to his new job, but far enough to feel like a new beginning. As they unpacked boxes in their new home, Jake felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in months. On their first night in the new house, Jake tucked Ethan into bed, just as he had when Ethan was small. "Dad," Ethan said softly as Jake turned to leave. "Yeah, buddy." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then met Jake's eyes. "You know you'll always be my real dad, right? No matter what." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling Ethan into a fierce hug. "I love you, son," he whispered. "Always have, always will." Father and son, bound not by blood but by something far stronger, love, trust, and the unbreakable bond forged in the fires of adversity. Jake Morrison, once a simple math teacher, now stood at the threshold of a new life. He had lost much, it was true, but he had gained something precious too: the knowledge of his own strength, the love of his son, and the chance to build a future on a foundation of truth and integrity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jake knew he was ready to face them. For himself, for Ethan, and for the man he had become through this crucible of betrayal and redemption. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. Alex Carter, 38. A successful real estate agent, known for his charm and negotiation skills. A confident yet sensitive man, Alex is passionate about his job and loves playing basketball with his friends on weekends. He lives in a beautiful, family-oriented neighborhood in Atlanta. Jenna Carter, 36. Alex's wife, a marketing executive at a tech firm. Intelligent and ambitious, Jenna has a knack for strategy, which has propelled her career forward. She recently started spending more time at the gym and dressing more fashionably. Ethan Collins, 40. Alex's old college friend, now an FBI agent. Ethan is known for his meticulous nature, loyalty, and sharp mind. He rarely talks about his work, but his friends respect him for his integrity. Chris Walker, 34. A charismatic fitness trainer Jenna met through her company's wellness program. He's athletic, attentive, and exudes confidence. He knows how to use his charm to make people feel comfortable around him. Alex and Jenna have been married for 12 years, sharing countless memories and dreams. They built a life together in Atlanta, investing in their home and planning to travel more now that their careers were flourishing. Alex thought they had a rock-solid marriage, despite a few rough patches over the years. They had grown from being college sweethearts into what Alex believed were life partners. But in the past year, things had subtly changed. Jenna's late-night work commitments and constant texts had become a routine. Alex tried to dismiss the unsettling feeling that something was wrong, chalking it up to the pressures of Jenna's demanding job. He convinced himself that they were just going through a phase, as many couples did after being together for over a decade. The turning point came one warm Thursday evening when Alex received an unexpected call from Ethan. They hadn't seen each other in years, but Ethan insisted on meeting at their old college hangout, a cozy pub in downtown Atlanta. His voice was tense, different from the laid-back tone Alex remembered. As they sat at a corner booth, sipping on beers, Ethan seemed unusually reserved, like he was carrying a weight he wasn't sure how to unload. Ethan finally broke the silence, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Alex, listen. What I'm about to tell you, it's not easy, and it's definitely not something I want to be involved in. But you're my friend, and you deserve to know the truth," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Alex felt a chill creep up his spine. Ethan's face, usually so composed, now looked conflicted and troubled. Alex leaned in closer, his mind racing with possibilities. Ethan took a deep breath before continuing. "During a surveillance assignment, I came across information about Jenna. It's not my job to pry into personal lives, but I saw her, Alex. She's been meeting this guy, Chris Walker. The surveillance wasn't on her, but the timing, the location, it was all too clear. Alex's mind struggled to process the words. The room seemed to spin as the weight of Ethan's revelation settled in. He clutched the edge of the table, trying to steady himself. His thoughts flashed to Jenna's late nights at the office, her phone that was always face down, the sudden interest in looking her best. It all started to make a horrible kind of sense. Are you sure?" Alex stammered, his voice barely holding back the storm of emotions building inside him. Ethan nodded solemnly. "I wouldn't bring this up if I wasn't certain. I even checked the dates, matched them with the time she claimed she was at work. I'm sorry, man." Alex barely made it through the rest of their conversation, his mind in turmoil. He thanked Ethan for the information, though his words felt hollow. As he drove home, his thoughts raced. Confronting Jenna outright was too risky. He needed to be sure, to see it with his own eyes. He decided to follow Ethan's advice and remain discreet for now. That night, Alex could barely sleep. He kept replaying moments in his mind, Jenna's sudden shift in attitude, the way she now guarded her phone, and the times she seemed distant. The next morning, he left for work earlier than usual, but instead of heading to the office, he parked near Jenna's workplace. From a distance, he watched her leave, not for her usual office building, but in a different direction. She drove towards a small, tucked-away cafe downtown, one that Alex hadn't heard her mention before. As Alex sat in his car, watching Jenna enter the cafe, he felt his stomach churn. Minutes later, he saw her meet Chris, a tall, athletic man who seemed overly familiar with Jenna. They sat by the window, their heads close together, laughing and sharing private smiles. Alex pulled out his phone and began recording, his hands trembling as he captured every second of their interaction. He watched in silence as Chris reached out to touch Jenna's hand, his thumb gently caressing her fingers. Jenna leaned in closer, a playful smile on her lips, and whispered something that made Chris chuckle. Alex's heart shattered as he realized he was witnessing a side of his wife he hadn't seen in years, carefree, flirtatious, and fully engaged. After about an hour, Jenna and Chris left the cafe, walking side by side, their shoulders brushing as they strolled towards Jenna's car. Alex followed them discreetly, his mind numb with disbelief and anger. They drove to a nearby hotel, and Alex's heart pounded as he watched them disappear inside. He couldn't bear to watch any longer. He sat in his car, fighting back tears, his mind grappling with the reality of the situation. Alex drove back home in a daze, his emotions swinging between heartbreak and fury. He knew he couldn't confront Jenna yet. He needed to stay calm and plan his next steps. He contacted Ethan, who agreed to help him discreetly gather more evidence. Over the next few weeks, they compiled text messages, photos, and even call logs that painted a clear picture of Jenna's betrayal. During this time, Alex played the role of a loving, oblivious husband. He cooked dinners, suggested weekend trips, and even surprised Jenna with flowers. Inside, however, he was boiling with rage, each smile a mask to hide his pain. Jenna seemed taken aback by his sudden affection, but she played along, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Alex's anger turned into a cold resolve. He wouldn't just confront Jenna, he would ensure that she faced the full weight of her actions. He meticulously planned a special anniversary dinner, inviting Ethan and a few close friends, setting up the scene for a reveal that Jenna would never forget. The night of the dinner arrived. Jenna was all smiles, dressed elegantly in the new dress Alex had gifted her, thinking it was a sign of their renewed connection. Alex, however, hid his true feelings behind a practiced smile. He had arranged everything perfectly, a candlelit table in their backyard, with their friends seated around, and a slideshow prepared to commemorate their years together. As the evening progressed, Alex stood up to make a toast. Jenna, these 12 years have been a journey, full of ups and downs, love and memories. I wanted to take a moment to share some of those with you all tonight, he said, gesturing towards the projector. The slideshow began with pictures from their wedding, vacations, and family gatherings. Jenna's smile widened as she relived the moments. But then, the images shifted to the ones Alex had gathered. Photos of Jenna with Chris at the cafe, their private moments in the hotel parking lot, and the text messages exchanged between them. Jenna's face drained of color. She looked around, realizing the friends present were watching the evidence unfold. Their expressions a mix of shock and sympathy for Alex. Alex continued, his voice breaking but steady. This is the woman I thought I knew, the one I trusted with my heart. And this is how she repaid me. Jenna stammered, trying to explain, but Alex silenced her with a raised hand. Don't. I've seen enough, Jenna. You've been lying to me for months, and you've shattered everything we built together. He pulled out a set of divorce papers from a folder on the table, dropping them in front of her. Sign these. Leave the house by the weekend. We're done. As Jenna left the table in tears, stumbling through apologies that no one seemed to believe, Alex felt a strange sense of relief. The betrayal still stung, but he knew he had taken control of the situation. Ethan placed a supportive hand on Alex's shoulder as their friends offered words of encouragement. In the weeks that followed, Alex adjusted to a new routine. The house felt emptier, quieter, but he found solace in focusing on his work and reconnecting with old hobbies. Ethan stayed in touch, checking in regularly to ensure Alex was coping well. One evening, Alex sat on his porch, looking out over the sunset, reflecting on how his life had changed. He had faced a painful truth, but in doing so, he had found a new strength within himself. He picked up his journal, starting a new entry. Sometimes, the hardest truths set us free. And that's how Alex uncovered the hidden truth about his wife's affair through an unlikely source, a friend who had his back when it mattered most. What would you do if you were in Alex's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.
When my wife and I moved into the house, I wasn't too keen on it from the start. The place was big, sure, and had plenty of space, but there was just something about it that I didn't like. Maybe it was because it used to belong to her previous husband. It felt like a reminder of the past, something I wasn't all that interested in. The house itself was in good shape, spacious, cozy, with enough room for both of us to have our own space. But there was one part of it I didn't like at all, the basement. The basement was cluttered with all kinds of junk. Boxes stacked on boxes, old furniture, and things that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. I offered to clear it out a few times, but my wife was adamant about keeping it all. She said it was important, memories and whatnot, and I didn't argue. I had my work to focus on, which kept me busy most of the time anyway, so I figured it wasn't worth starting a fight over a bunch of old stuff in the basement. I had a lot on my plate with work, and I was often out of town or working late. That made it easy to just ignore the basement and everything in it. Besides, my wife was happy with the house, and I didn't want to mess that up. I wasn't about to get into arguments over things that, to me, were trivial. She could keep all the junk she wanted down there as long as it didn't get in my way. One day, my wife's friend came over for a visit. They were in the kitchen chatting, and I was in the living room, half listening while I went through some emails. I heard the friend mention something about a room, and it caught my attention. I asked my wife what her friend meant by that. She waved it off, saying her friend was just talking about the basement. She mentioned something about it being remodeled or fixed up, which struck me as odd since I hadn't heard anything about it before. The way she brushed it off didn't sit right with me. It wasn't like we had talked about remodeling anything, let alone the basement. I thought about pressing her for more details, but she changed the subject so quickly that I let it go. Maybe it was just some misunderstanding, I told myself. There were more important things for me to worry about, like work deadlines and keeping up with everything else I had going on. Still, it stayed in the back of my mind. I wasn't the type to let things bother me, but the way my wife had dismissed my question so quickly made me wonder. I didn't want to be the paranoid type, and I certainly didn't want to start doubting her over something so small. So I let it drop, telling myself it was nothing to get worked up about. A few days later, I was in the basement grabbing some tools, and I took another look around. Nothing seemed different. The same old boxes, the same old junk piled up in the corners. I didn't see anything that looked like it had been remodeled or fixed up. Everything was as cluttered and disorganized as ever. I figured that if there was something going on down here, I'd notice it. And there was nothing. Just the same mess as always. After that, I decided to let it go completely. There was no point in making a big deal out of something that probably didn't mean anything. The basement was still the basement, full of junk that my wife insisted on keeping. I had enough on my plate without adding unnecessary drama to the mix. If my wife wanted to hold onto a bunch of old stuff, that was her business. As long as it didn't interfere with my life, I didn't care. A few weeks after we settled into the new house, my wife suggested we host a party for our friends. We both had a pretty big social circle, and the idea of having everyone over sounded good to me. It was a chance to break in the new place, let everyone see where we were living, and just enjoy ourselves. We spent the whole day preparing. My wife handled most of the decorating while I took care of the food and drinks. By the time people started showing up, the house was looking great and everything seemed set for a good night. The party was lively. We had music playing, people were talking and laughing, and the whole place was buzzing. I was busy making sure everyone had what they needed, whether it was a fresh drink or something to snack on. My wife was the perfect host, smiling and chatting with everyone. It was one of those moments that made all the hassle of moving worth it. The place really felt like a home with everyone there. At some point during the night, I was making my way around the rooms, just checking in on everyone. That's when I noticed my wife wasn't around. I figured she was probably in the kitchen or maybe outside with some of the guests. But as I moved through the rooms, I didn't see her anywhere. I asked a couple of people if they'd seen her, and they just shrugged, saying she was around earlier. It wasn't like her to just disappear during a party, especially since she loved being around everyone. I went out to the back patio, thinking she might be out there having a smoke or just getting some fresh air. No sign of her. I checked the upstairs rooms, even though there wasn't really any reason for her to be up there during the party. Nothing. I knew a few of her friends were missing too, and I wondered if they had all gone somewhere together. After a while, I went back downstairs. The party was still going, and I didn't want to make a scene or start asking everyone where my wife was. Maybe they had gone to grab something from the car, or maybe they were just outside somewhere I hadn't thought to look. It wasn't worth worrying about in front of everyone. It must have been about 20 minutes later when my wife finally reappeared. She came in through the back door, along with a couple of her friends. I walked over, asking where she'd been, and she smiled, telling me they'd just stepped out for a smoke. Her friends were laughing, and everyone seemed fine, so I left it at that. My wife went back to mingling with the guests, and I did the same. I kept an eye on her for a little while, just to see if anything seemed off, but she was her usual self, laughing and chatting like nothing had happened. I decided to let it go. The party was still going, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. There was no point in dwelling on it. The rest of the night went smoothly. We enjoyed ourselves, and the house was filled with laughter and conversation. Once the party wrapped up and the guests had left, my wife and I cleaned up a bit before heading to bed. A few days later, I came home from work earlier than usual. As I walked in, I didn't hear much noise, which was a bit unusual. Normally, my wife would be in the living room or the kitchen, but today it seemed quieter. I figured she might be in the basement, sorting through all that stuff she insisted on keeping. I decided to head down there to see what she was up to. When I opened the door to the basement and started down the stairs, I saw my wife and her friend standing there. They both looked up at me, clearly surprised. It wasn't like I had announced I was coming down, but their reaction seemed a little more than just being startled. They exchanged glances before my wife greeted me, and her friend gave me a small wave. I asked what they were doing, and my wife quickly explained that her friend needed an inflatable boat for her boyfriend. I looked around the basement, trying to remember if we even had an inflatable boat down there. The basement was full of old boxes, furniture, and things we never used. My wife pointed vaguely toward a stack of boxes and said it might be in there somewhere. I walked over, giving the boxes a quick once-over. Something about them looked off. They were stacked neatly, but some of them looked like they should have been heavier, yet they seemed almost empty. It struck me as odd, but I didn't say anything. Instead of wasting time rummaging through the basement, I told them I'd get the boat from the garage. I remembered putting it there when we first moved in, thinking it would be easier to access if we ever needed it. My wife looked a bit relieved when I said that, and her friend smiled, thanking me. I headed back up the stairs, leaving them in the basement. As I walked to the garage, I couldn't help but wonder what they were really doing down there. I found the inflatable boat right where I thought it would be, tucked away in the corner of the garage. I grabbed it and headed back inside. When I got back to the basement, my wife and her friend were still there, but they seemed more relaxed now. I handed the boat over, and my wife's friend thanked me again, saying her boyfriend would really appreciate it. I nodded, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. If they needed the boat, they could have it. After that, I decided to head back upstairs and let them finish whatever they were doing. My wife said they'd be up in a bit, and I didn't see any reason to stick around. As I left, I glanced back at the boxes again. They were still stacked neatly, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But I wasn't about to start questioning my wife in front of her friend. If she wanted to keep whatever was in those boxes to herself, that was her business. I went to the living room and turned on the TV, trying to push the whole thing out of my mind. It wasn't like I had any real reason to be suspicious. My wife had always been good about keeping the house in order, and if she wanted to help her friend out, that was fine by me. I just couldn't help but feel like there was something they weren't telling me. But I wasn't going to press the issue, not yet anyway. A little while later, my wife and her friend came upstairs, chatting and laughing like everything was perfectly normal. My wife gave me a smile and asked if I wanted anything to eat. I shook my head, watching as they went into the kitchen. I decided to let it go for now. Whatever they were doing in the basement, it wasn't worth making a scene over. If there was something going on, I'd find out eventually. For now, I had other things to focus on. The following week, I got a call from work. My manager told me there was a situation in another city where they needed a specialist, and I might need to go there for a few days. They hadn't been able to find anyone local who could handle it, so I was their best option. It wasn't set in stone yet, but I needed to be ready to leave on short notice if it came through. I was used to this sort of thing, so it wasn't a big deal. I told them I'd be ready when needed. Later that evening, I sat down with my wife to let her know about the possible work trip. She took the news calmly, nodding along as I explained the situation. She asked a few questions about how long I'd be gone and what the job was about. It wasn't unusual for me to get called away for work, so she knew the drill. We both understood that my job sometimes required me to be away, and we had gotten used to it. As we talked, she mentioned that some of her old friends might come by while I was away. She didn't give too many details, just said they were planning to catch up. I didn't think much of it. She had her own friends and her own life, and if she wanted to have people over while I was gone, that was fine by me. I trusted her, and I didn't see any reason to question it. I told her it sounded like a good idea. It would give her something to do while I was away, and I knew she enjoyed spending time with her friends. She seemed pleased and thanked me for understanding. I wasn't the type to get in the way of her social life, and I knew it was important for her to have that connection, especially when I wasn't around. Over the next couple of days, I made preparations for the possible trip. I packed a bag with the essentials and made sure all my work documents were in order. My wife seemed to be in a good mood, mentioning her friends again and saying they were excited to come by. I nodded along, focusing on making sure I was ready for whatever work would require of me. The day before I was supposed to leave, I got the confirmation from work. They needed me in the other city, and I was set to leave early the next morning. I let my wife know, and she seemed genuinely supportive, telling me she hoped everything went smoothly. She also mentioned again that her friends would probably come by while I was gone, and I told her to have fun and enjoy herself. That night, we had dinner together, and everything felt normal. We talked about the usual things, what we needed from the store, plans for the weekend, just everyday stuff. I enjoyed moments like this, the simple routines that made life feel stable and comfortable. My wife seemed relaxed, and I was content knowing everything at home was fine. The next morning, I got up early, grabbed my bag, and headed out the door. My wife saw me off, giving me a quick kiss and telling me to be safe. I promised I'd call when I got there, and she waved as I pulled out of the driveway. As I drove away, I felt good about everything. Work was going well, my wife seemed happy, and it was just another routine work trip. I didn't have any reason to think otherwise. The next day, I left for the work trip as planned. The situation I was called for turned out to be a lot simpler than everyone expected. I managed to fix the issue quickly, much faster than the estimated timeline. With everything wrapped up, I decided it would be nice to head home early and surprise my wife. I thought she might appreciate me coming back ahead of schedule. I was in a good mood as I drove back, thinking about a quiet evening together. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a couple of extra cars parked nearby. I didn't think much of it at first, our neighborhood always had cars parked around. I grabbed my bag and headed inside. As soon as I stepped in, I noticed something was off. The floor had muddy footprints leading from the door and across the hallway. It seemed odd, considering my wife usually kept the place spotless, especially if she was expecting guests. I set my bag down and followed the trail with my eyes, trying to make sense of it. I decided to take off my shoes and clean up a bit. As I headed to the kitchen to grab a paper towel, I noticed the trash bin was a little overfilled. I figured I'd take it out while I was at it, just to tidy up. When I opened the lid, something caught my attention right away, an empty box of condoms sitting right on top. I paused for a moment, just staring at it. We hadn't used condoms in years. There was no reason for there to be an empty box in our trash. I took a step back, trying to process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. My wife and I had always been open about things, and I couldn't think of any reason why she would need condoms, especially not when I was away. A strange feeling settled in my chest, something between confusion and suspicion. I closed the lid and stepped away from the trash, my mind running through possibilities. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was hard not to. I walked through the hallway, my eyes drifting towards the basement door. That's when I heard it, a muffled thud coming from down below. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me stop in my tracks. My first thought was that something had fallen over. Maybe one of the boxes that were always stacked haphazardly down there. But given everything else I'd noticed, it felt off. I stood there for a moment, staring at the basement door. The muddy footprints led in that direction, stopping right in front of it. I listened, trying to hear if there was anything else, but everything had gone quiet again. My gut told me that I needed to check it out. Whatever was happening, it seemed like the basement was the place to start. Slowly, I walked over to the door and put my hand on the handle. I paused, taking a breath. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find down there, but I knew I had to look. The whole situation felt wrong, and I needed answers. The thud, the footprints, the empty box in the trash, it all pointed towards something I couldn't ignore. I turned the handle and opened the door, peering down into the dimly lit basement. As I started down the stairs, I could feel my heart pounding. The air felt heavy, and each step seemed to echo in the quiet house. I reached the bottom of the stairs and looked around, scanning the cluttered space. Nothing seemed immediately out of place, but I knew there was more to this. I took a few more steps forward, determined to find out what was really going on. Standing at the bottom of the basement stairs, I looked around, trying to figure out where that noise had come from. Everything seemed quiet, but something felt different. I noticed that some of the boxes stacked along the far wall were slightly out of place. They were usually piled neatly, but now they looked like they'd been moved recently. It was subtle, but enough to catch my attention. I walked over to take a closer look, feeling a growing unease in my gut. I started moving the boxes, one by one, setting them aside as quietly as I could. As I worked, I noticed a small gap forming behind them. I kept going, shifting more boxes until the gap became wide enough to reveal something I hadn't seen before. There, hidden behind the clutter, was a door. It was old, with a simple handle, and it looked like it had been there for a long time. I couldn't remember ever noticing it before, and that alone was enough to make me stop and think. For a moment, I hesitated. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find behind that door, but everything about this felt off. The footprints, the empty box in the trash, the strange noise, it all led me here. I put my hand on the handle, feeling the cold metal against my skin, and took a deep breath. Whatever was behind that door, I needed to know. I turned the handle slowly, and the door opened with a soft creak. Behind the door, I was met with a dim red light. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the strange glow. It was a small room, not much larger than a storage closet, but it was unlike anything I'd ever seen in our house. The walls were covered in some kind of soundproofing material, and the entire place was bathed in an eerie red glow. I stepped inside, feeling the temperature drop slightly, and looked around, trying to take it all in. There were items in the room, things that made my stomach turn. Intimate devices, toys, and other objects I didn't even recognize were neatly arranged on shelves and tables. The whole setup was unmistakably deliberate, like someone had gone to great lengths to create a very specific atmosphere. It wasn't just a storage room, it was a place meant for something else entirely. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing, and I felt a cold knot forming in my chest. I took a step further into the room, my eyes moving over the strange collection of items. There were cuffs attached to the wall, a large cushioned bench in the middle of the floor, and various other things that made it clear what this room was used for. The red light made everything look surreal, almost like something out of a nightmare. I couldn't believe that this was in my house, that this was something my wife had hidden away. There, in the middle of the room, was my wife, and she wasn't alone. She was with 3 other men, all of them completely oblivious to my presence. My head spun as I tried to process what I was seeing. It felt like my world had shattered in an instant. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, was there with those men, engaging in something that I could hardly believe. The red light made the entire scene look surreal, almost like a twisted nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. My mind went blank, and for a moment, I couldn't move or even breathe. I just stood there, frozen, watching something that should never have happened. It was the kind of moment that you never think will happen to you, and yet there I was, living it. In the corner of the room, I noticed an enormous toy, something I couldn't even comprehend being used. It added another layer of shock to an already unbearable situation. My wife, the person I had shared my life with, was involved in something I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. Anger, disbelief, and heartbreak hit me all at once, like a wave crashing over me. I wanted to scream, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. I felt my hands clench into fists as I stood there, watching the scene unfold. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, seconds, minutes, it all blurred together. The men still hadn't noticed me, and my wife was completely absorbed in what she was doing. I couldn't believe that this was happening in my house, in a room I hadn't even known existed. The betrayal cut deep, and I felt like I was about to explode from the emotions boiling inside me. Finally, I took a step forward, the floor creaking under my weight. One of the men turned his head, his eyes widening as he saw me. The shock on his face was instant, and he quickly nudged the others. My wife looked up then, her expression changing from pleasure to horror in a split second. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us moved. I could see the realization dawning on her face, the understanding that everything was about to change. The room fell silent, the only sound being the heavy breathing of everyone involved. My wife scrambled to cover herself, her eyes wide with fear and shock. The men looked at each other, clearly unsure of what to do next. I felt my whole body trembling, my vision narrowing as the anger and betrayal threatened to take over completely. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, glaring at each of them, the weight of what I had seen pressing down on me. My wife opened her mouth, as if to say something, but no words came out. She looked terrified, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of pity for her. But the rage quickly swallowed it up. There was no excuse, no explanation that could make this right. I took another step forward, and the men started to back away, clearly wanting to avoid whatever was about to happen. My wife reached out a hand, as if to stop me, but I ignored it. I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop to think. I knew exactly where I was headed. I made my way to the bedroom, yanking open the closet door and reaching up to the top shelf where I kept my shotgun. My hands were shaking, but the anger drove me forward. I wasn't going to let this go. I needed answers, and I wasn't about to ask nicely. With the gun in my hand, I turned and stormed back down the stairs, my grip tightening on the stock. I could hear the muffled voices from the basement, but I didn't care what they were saying. They had no idea what was coming. I reached the basement door, flung it open, and thundered down the steps, my eyes blazing with fury. The moment I stepped back into that red-lit room, I shouted, demanding to know what the hell was going on. The room fell silent. My wife and the three men all turned to look at me, their faces a mix of shock and fear. My wife was pale, her eyes wide, tears streaming down her face. The men looked stunned, clearly not expecting things to escalate like this. One of them, a smug-looking guy, had the audacity to try to joke. He grinned, raising his hands in mock surrender, and suggested that maybe I should join them. The words barely registered before my rage took over. Without thinking, I lifted the shotgun and pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening in the small room, the red light flickering as the shot echoed off the walls. The bullet flew just inches from the man's head, embedding itself in the wall behind him. His face went white, and all traces of his smirk vanished. The other men stood frozen for a second, their eyes wide with terror, before they scrambled to their feet, stumbling over each other in their rush to get away. Panic took over the room. The men ran for the stairs, not even looking back, tripping over boxes and each other as they tried to escape. My wife remained where she was, sitting on the floor, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. She didn't try to move, didn't even look at me. The fear and confusion in her eyes were clear, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what she'd done. I watched as the men disappeared up the stairs, their footsteps echoing through the house as they bolted for the door. I didn't bother following them. They weren't my concern anymore. I turned my attention back to my wife, who was still sitting there, her shoulders shaking as she cried. My grip on the shotgun tightened, and I took a step closer, my voice low and filled with anger as I demanded an explanation. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. But no words came out. Just more tears. I stood there, staring at her, waiting for something, anything, that could make sense of this. But there was nothing. Just silence and the sound of her crying. The anger inside me burned hot, but there was also a cold emptiness, a sense of finality that told me whatever we had was over. After the chaos settled and the men had fled, I found myself alone in the house, the silence almost deafening. The red glow of that basement room still spilled out into the hallway, and I knew I had to go back down. There was something unresolved, something pulling me back into that space. My wife was still in there, her sobs echoing faintly from below. But I didn't care about her tears. My eyes moved over the clutter of intimate items, the cuffs, the red light. And then I noticed something that hadn't registered before, a small camera, mounted high in the corner of the room, its lens pointed directly at the center of everything. It was discreet, barely noticeable, but there it was, silently watching. My stomach turned at the sight of it. I moved closer, reaching up to take it down. The camera was connected to a small recording device, hidden away behind a stack of boxes. I pulled it out, the cords trailing behind as I set it on the table. I stared at it for a moment, my heart pounding, before I pressed play. The screen flickered to life, and I watched as images filled the display. My wife, the men, the acts that had taken place in this room. Everything was there, captured in cold, unflinching detail. My hands clenched into fists as I scrolled through the footage, each clip more damning than the last. There was no denying it now. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was planned, deliberate, something that had happened over and over again. My wife had been bringing these men into our home, into this hidden room, and she'd recorded it all. The betrayal cut deeper with each passing moment, the realization that this had been going on right under my nose. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, disgust, heartbreak. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had shared my life with, was a stranger to me now. I watched the footage, unable to look away, even as it made my skin crawl. There was no explanation, no excuse that could ever make this right. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and done it all without a second thought. And now, I had the proof right in front of me. I heard movement behind me, and I turned to see my wife standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked at the camera in my hands, and I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew what I'd found, knew there was no hiding from it anymore. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off, my voice cold as I told her to save her excuses. There was nothing she could say that would change what I'd seen. She took a step forward, her hands trembling as she reached out to me. But I stepped back, shaking my head. I didn't want her anywhere near me. I turned my attention back to the footage, scrolling through more clips, each one a dagger to the heart. The room seemed to close in around me, the red light casting everything in a sickly glow. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of what I discovered pressing down on me. After a moment, I stood up, taking the camera and the recording device with me. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but I knew one thing, I wasn't going to let her get away with this. She had taken everything we had and destroyed it, and now it was my turn to decide what happened next. I walked out of the basement, leaving her there, her sobs following me up the stairs as I made my way out of that hellish room. After that night, I knew there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't shake. I didn't want to be there anymore, not in that house, not with her. I packed my things, moving through the house like a ghost, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. I didn't bother saying anything to her, there was nothing left to say. She knew what she'd done, and I knew that there was no way I could stay. I grabbed my bags and walked out the front door, not looking back even once. I checked into a hotel on the other side of town, needing a place to clear my head and figure out my next steps. Everything felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. The anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but there was also a strange numbness that had settled over me. I felt disconnected, as if I was watching everything unfold from a distance. I knew what I had to do next, but the reality of it all felt like a weight pressing down on me. The next few days were a blur. I met with a lawyer, filed for divorce, and started the process of cutting ties with her completely. It was all mechanical, a series of actions that needed to be done, and I moved through them without feeling anything. The lawyer asked questions, went over paperwork, and I answered as best as I could. There was no point in dragging it out. I wanted it over, and I wanted it done as quickly as possible. I couldn't stand the thought of being connected to her for a moment longer than necessary. The rage, though, was still there. It was a constant presence, a reminder of what she'd done, of how she'd betrayed me. And as I sat alone in that hotel room, staring at the footage I'd taken from the basement, an idea began to form. She had humiliated me, destroyed everything we had, and I wasn't going to let her walk away from it without consequences. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't enough to just leave her, I wanted everyone to know what kind of person she really was. I started going through my contacts, thinking about who needed to see the truth. friends, family, people who thought they knew her. I wanted them to see what I'd seen, to understand what she'd done. It was petty, maybe even cruel, but I didn't care. She had made her choices, and now she would have to face the consequences. I copied the footage onto my laptop, making sure everything was ready. I was meticulous, taking my time to ensure that nothing was left out. Once I had everything prepared, I sent the files out. It was a simple process, emails, messages, a few clicks, and it was done. There was no going back now. I watched as the progress bar filled, each message being sent off to someone who had once been a part of our lives. It felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders, a sense of satisfaction that came from knowing she wouldn't be able to hide from what she'd done. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and now everyone would know. The responses started coming in almost immediately. Shock, disbelief, questions that I had no interest in answering. People were calling, messaging, trying to make sense of what they'd seen. I ignored most of it, letting the calls go to voicemail, the messages pile up unanswered. I didn't care about their reactions. This wasn't about them. It was about her, and about making sure she faced the consequences of her actions. I wanted her to feel the same pain, the same humiliation that she'd put me through. Eventually, I turned off my phone, leaning back in the chair and closing my eyes. There was a strange sense of closure in what I'd done. It didn't make the pain go away, didn't erase the betrayal, but it felt like I had taken something back. I had taken control, in a situation where I had felt powerless. And as I sat there, the hotel room quiet around me, I knew that I was ready to move on. The marriage was over, and so was the part of my life that included her. It was time to start over, to leave the past behind, and to figure out what came next. The fallout from everything that happened was swift and brutal. My wife's betrayal, captured on video and shared with everyone who knew us, left her in a situation she couldn't escape. People she considered friends turned their backs on her, family members who had once supported her now looked at her with disdain. The whispers, the judgment, the constant reminders of what she'd done, it all became too much. She realized that staying in the same city, in the same environment, was impossible. She had to leave. I heard about it from some mutual friends. They said she had packed her things and left, that she couldn't handle the shame and the way people looked at her. It wasn't a surprise. After everything that had happened, after the way people had reacted to the recordings, it was only a matter of time before she decided to leave. She couldn't stay here, not with everyone knowing what she'd done. The judgment was too much, and she needed to get away. They told me she had moved to a different city, somewhere far enough away where no one knew her. She needed a fresh start, a chance to rebuild her life without the weight of her mistakes hanging over her. I could understand that, even if I didn't feel any sympathy for her. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. Leaving was the only way she could try to move on, to leave behind the mess she'd created. I pictured her packing her things, moving through the house that we had once shared, collecting whatever she could fit into her bags. It must have been painful, a reminder of everything she had lost. But that was her reality now. She had thrown everything away, and there was no getting it back. Leaving was her only option, and it was probably the best thing for both of us. I didn't want her here, and she didn't belong here anymore. The friends who told me about her leaving didn't have many details. They just knew she had found a small apartment in some other city, a place where she could disappear and try to start over. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a chance for her to escape the judgment, the whispers, the looks of disgust. She needed that, and honestly, so did I. The sooner she was out of my life, the better. I didn't feel anything when I heard the news. No relief, no sadness, no anger. It was just another step in the process of moving on. She was gone, and that was that. There was no point in dwelling on it, no point in thinking about what she might be doing or how she might be feeling. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. All I cared about was that she was no longer a part of my life. The friends who told me about her leaving seemed to expect some kind of reaction from me, but I didn't give them one. I just nodded, thanked them for letting me know, and went back to what I was doing. There was nothing more to say. She was gone, and I had my own life to focus on. The past was the past, and I wasn't going to let it drag me down any longer. It was time to move forward, without her. Maybe one day she would find some kind of peace, some way to move on from everything that had happened. But that wasn't my concern. She was no longer my problem, and I was done thinking about her. She had left, and now it was time for me to do the same, to leave behind the pain, the betrayal, and everything that had come with it. It was time to start over, to build a new life without her in it. It had been about a month since everything had fallen apart. I was doing my best to move on, to start over without her, but some nights were harder than others. I was still staying at the motel, trying to figure out what my next steps would be. One evening, as I was walking back to my room after grabbing a coffee, I noticed something, a figure standing near the edge of the parking lot. It was dark, but something about the way they were standing felt familiar. I squinted, trying to make out who it was. As I got closer, the figure moved, stepping into the light. My heart sank as I recognized her, my ex-wife. She looked different, worn out, almost desperate. I stopped, my hand tightening around my cup. I wasn't sure what she was doing there, but I knew it couldn't be good. She saw me and started walking towards me, her steps quick and frantic. Before I could react, she was in front of me, her eyes wide and pleading. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't have time to respond before I saw movement behind her. 3 more figures emerged from the shadows, and my blood ran cold as I recognized them, the same 3 men from the basement. They were moving towards us, their faces set with determination. My ex-wife turned to look at them, then back at me. "They want you to delete the recordings," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I felt a surge of anger and fear. Of course, they were here for the recordings. They wanted to erase the evidence, to make sure no one else saw what had happened. One of the men stepped forward, his expression hard. "Delete the recordings," he said, his voice low and threatening. I looked at him, then at my ex-wife. She looked terrified, her eyes darting between me and the men. I knew I had to think fast. I clutched my chest, wincing as if in pain. "My heart," I muttered, stumbling backward. My ex-wife's eyes widened, and she rushed towards me. She knew about my heart condition, knew that stress could trigger an episode. I let myself fall to the ground, curling up as if I was in agony. The men hesitated, unsure of what to do. My ex-wife knelt beside me, her hands shaking as she tried to help me. I could see the confusion on their faces, the uncertainty. They hadn't expected this, hadn't planned for it. I waited, holding my breath, until I saw one of them take a step back, looking like he was about to tell the others to leave. That was the moment I had been waiting for. In one quick motion, I rolled onto my side, reaching into my jacket and pulling out the knife I had tucked away. I sprang up, the blade in my hand, and pointed it at them. The men froze, their eyes widening in shock. My ex-wife gasped, stumbling backward, her hands flying to her mouth. I stood there, my heart pounding, the knife steady in my hand. "If any of you come near me again," I said, my voice cold and even, "I won't hesitate. I will do whatever it takes to protect myself. I don't care if I end up in prison. I'll make sure you regret it." The threat hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. The men looked at each other, then back at me. They could see I wasn't bluffing. I meant every word. Slowly, they began to back away, their hands raised in a gesture of surrender. My ex-wife stayed where she was, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. I kept the knife pointed at them until they were far enough away that I felt safe lowering it. One of the men muttered something under his breath, and they turned, walking away quickly, disappearing into the darkness. My ex-wife stayed for a moment longer, her eyes locked on mine. She looked like she wanted to say something, but I shook my head. "Go," I said, my voice flat. "Just go." She hesitated, then turned and followed the men, her figure fading into the night. I stood there for a moment, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. My hands were shaking, but I didn't let go of the knife until I was sure they were gone. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I knew then that I couldn't stay here any longer. They had found me once, and there was no telling if they'd try again. I needed to leave, to put as much distance between myself and them as possible. That night, I packed my things, throwing everything into my bag with shaking hands. I had already decided where I was going, back to my hometown. It wasn't ideal, but it was familiar, and it was far away from all of this. I needed a fresh start, a place where I could rebuild without constantly looking over my shoulder. I couldn't keep living like this, always waiting for the next threat, the next confrontation. I left the motel in the early hours of the morning, the sky still dark as I loaded my things into the car. I took one last look at the place, the memories of the past month flashing through my mind. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. I had faced the worst, had stood up for myself, and now it was time to move on. I got into the car, started the engine, and drove away, the road stretching out before me. The drive was long, and the silence gave me time to think. I knew that what had happened would stay with me forever, that the pain and betrayal would always be a part of me. But I also knew that I couldn't let it define me. I had taken control of my life back, had faced down the people who had tried to break me, and I had come out the other side. I was still standing, still moving forward. By the time I reached my hometown, the sun was starting to rise, casting a golden glow over the familiar streets. I felt a sense of relief, a weight lifting off my shoulders as I pulled into the driveway of the small house I had rented. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A place where I could begin to rebuild, far away from the chaos and pain of the past. I stepped out of the car, taking a deep breath of the cool morning air. It was quiet here, peaceful. Exactly what I needed. I knew there was still a long road ahead, that healing would take time, but I was ready to face it. One step at a time, one day at a time, I would rebuild. And this time, I would make sure that no one ever took my peace from me again. It wasn't long after I settled into my hometown that my phone started buzzing again. I knew who it was even before I looked at the screen. My ex-wife was trying to reach me. The calls came in waves, her name flashing across the screen, her desperation evident with each attempt. I ignored them, silencing the phone and tossing it aside. I didn't know what she thought she could accomplish by calling me now. The damage had been done. There was no going back. For whatever reason, she seemed to think that if she begged enough, if she pleaded with me, I would delete the recordings. Maybe she thought that without the evidence, things would somehow get better for her. I didn't understand why she was so desperate for me to get rid of them. Everyone who needed to see it had already seen it. Her reputation was ruined, and deleting the footage wouldn't change that. But still, she kept calling, her messages piling up, her voice shaky and pleading in the voicemails she left. She talked about wanting a fresh start, about needing to move on, and how the recordings were holding her back. She said she couldn't live her life with the constant fear of the recordings resurfacing. She begged me to delete them, to let her move on without the weight of that fear hanging over her. But I had no interest in helping her. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. I wasn't going to make things easier for her after everything she put me through. The truth was, I had already moved on. I was in a different city, far away from her and from everything that had happened. I didn't care about the recordings anymore. I wasn't interested in using them against her, and I wasn't planning on sending them to anyone else. But I wasn't going to delete them either. They were a reminder of what had happened, a reminder of why I had left. I needed that reminder, at least for now, to keep myself focused on what mattered, building a new life, away from her. Each time the phone rang, I felt a mixture of annoyance and pity. Part of me wanted to answer, to tell her to leave me alone, to let her know that there was no point in calling. But I knew it wouldn't make a difference. She would keep calling, keep trying to find some way to undo what had already been done. So I let the calls go unanswered, her messages piling up, her desperation growing with each missed call. It was sad, in a way, but it wasn't my problem anymore. She didn't know where I was. I had made sure of that before I left. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, hadn't left any trace of my plans. I wanted a clean break, a fresh start, without the risk of her showing up and dragging me back into the chaos. And now, as I watched her calls come in, I knew I had made the right choice. She was still trying to pull me back in, still trying to get me to fix what couldn't be fixed. Eventually, the calls started to slow down. The messages stopped coming as frequently, the voicemails growing shorter and more resigned. She must have realized that I wasn't going to answer, that I wasn't going to give her what she wanted. I hoped that meant she would move on, that she would finally understand that there was no fixing what had happened. I had moved on, and it was time for her to do the same. In the end, it didn't matter why she wanted the recordings gone. The damage had been done, and there was no erasing it. She would have to live with the choices she made, just like I had to live with mine. And as I sat in my new place, far away from her and everything that had happened, I felt a sense of peace. She couldn't find me, couldn't drag me back into the past. I was free, and I was determined to keep it that way.
I grew up in a small town where life moved slowly and everyone knew everyone. My parents ran a modest hardware store that doubled as the heart of the community. My father taught me the value of hard work, while my mother showed me the importance of kindness, even when life wasn't easy. Despite their differences, they worked together seamlessly, a partnership I always hoped to emulate. In high school, I was the quiet kid, more comfortable with books than with crowds. My first love was Emily, a girl with an infectious laugh and a passion for painting. We dated through senior year, dreaming of a future that didn't pan out. She moved away for art school and I stayed, feeling the weight of responsibility to help my parents. College was a blur of classes and part-time jobs. It was there I met Lila, an ambitious journalism student with big dreams and a sharp wit. She was magnetic, the kind of person who made you believe anything was possible. We fell hard and fast, marrying right after graduation. Those early years were blissful, filled with late-night talks about the future and weekend getaways that felt like stolen treasures. But over time, the cracks began to show. My demanding job as a traveling technician left me drained, while Lila's career blossomed, demanding more of her time and energy. The love we once shared was overshadowed by resentment and unmet expectations. By the time she asked for a divorce, I wasn't even sure who we were anymore. Strangers tied together by memories. I sank into the recliner, watching as my wife of 6 years walked out the door, knowing she would soon be my ex-wife. My emotions felt tangled and distant, like they belonged to someone else. That morning, she'd bluntly announced her decision to leave, leaving me in a daze. Earlier in the day, she'd requested I return home by 6, saying we needed to talk. When I arrived, the absence of dinner hinted at something amiss. What followed was a conversation that unraveled the life we had built. Lila met me with a tense expression, her words cutting straight to the heart of the matter. She wanted a divorce. "Hi," she said. "Sit down. We need to talk." She got straight to the point. "When we got married, I thought we'd have a good life. But the last 4 years have shown me that staying married isn't what I want. You're never home, and when you are, you're too tired to care about me." I tried to explain. "I work long hours to pay the bills. You work too, but it's not enough. If you'd help more, I'd ask my boss to keep me in town. That's not the only problem. You don't even take care of the backyard you insisted on," she snapped. "You could hire someone, and then we could go out more," I suggested. "With what money?" she snapped, her frustration cutting through the air. "It's not getting better, Oliver. I'm tired of waiting. I want excitement, and you're not giving me that. I'm done." I met her gaze, trying to process her words. "So, a divorce?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Yes," she replied firmly. 6 months and we'll both be free." "Who's paying for it?" I questioned. "I will," she answered without hesitation. "That's fair," I said, nodding. "Do it." She grabbed her coat and paused at the door as if to say something. Then she left. I sat there thinking about what I'd miss. She was demanding and self-centered, but she was still something to come home to. Did I love her? I wasn't sure anymore. Not once had either of us said the word love during that conversation. That was sad. Later, I drove to Miles's bar. It had been a couple of weeks since I'd been there. Lila's decision stung, but I knew I'd get over it. At the bar, I bought a $5 scratch ticket instead of my usual singles. Feeling bold, I also bought tickets for the state lottery and Powerball. Cheap fool, Miles teased. You'll never win big with those scratch-offs. Go for the big money. Let the machine pick, I said. It's smarter than me anyway. I grabbed some peanuts and asked the waitress to move my beer to a booth. Stupid rule. I couldn't carry it myself. Soon, Elliot and Anna Reed joined me. We talked, I had another beer, and then hunger set in. I left for a steakhouse, ordered the smallest steak, and had another beer with my meal. No dessert, just one last drink. I was pushing my limits, so I'd need to drive carefully. Home, I thought bitterly. It wasn't a home anymore, just an empty house. Unless Lila changed her mind, though she left like she wasn't coming back. Maybe she went to her sister's. Brenda wouldn't have treated me like Lila did. Not that it mattered. I was getting maudlin. Time to go home and sleep. I didn't stop moving except for a quick bathroom break. Once home, I began undressing, slipping the lottery tickets into my wallet. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I pulled out the scratch ticket. Scratching it off, I matched 3 cows, $10,000. Another cow brought it to $15,000. Shaking with excitement, I revealed the final emblem, $25,000. I laughed out loud. Take that, Lila. Pay for your own divorce. Still grinning, I locked the bedroom door and went to bed. If Lila came back, she could sleep in the spare room. That ticket would keep me company tonight. By morning, the empty house felt depressing until I remembered the ticket. Deciding to keep it safe, I waited for the bank to open and rented a safe deposit box. I put the ticket inside, along with the numbers for the state lottery and Powerball. I copied the numbers onto a scrap of paper from my wallet. Would this money change my life? Probably not right away. At work, I was preparing for my 2 p.m. flight. Back home at noon to shower and shave, I noticed Lila still hadn't returned. Concerned, I called her sister Brenda. She's here, Brenda said curtly. Talk some sense into her. Lila took the phone. Her voice was cold. What do you want, Oliver? We're done. You didn't say you were leaving this soon, I replied, trying to keep my tone even. Well, I have, she said flatly. I won't be back. When are you coming for your stuff? I pressed. Tomorrow, the weekend? Are you asking for the house, too? There's still a big mortgage. You can keep it if you handle the payments, she said without hesitation. I just need a list of assets from my lawyer. I don't care about much. I just want to move on. Fine, I said with a sigh. Send the papers and I'll sign. But I think you're making a mistake. We could have worked this out. No, Oliver, she said firmly. I fell out of love. I need to start over. Is there someone else? I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. No, she said after a pause. But there might be before this is over. Please don't make this harder. I swallowed hard. Okay, Lila, if this is what you want, I won't stand in your way. Take care. I packed my bag and headed to the airport. I'd be gone until Wednesday, giving her time to clear out. Oddly, I trusted her to only take what was hers. We might not love each other anymore, but there was still a shred of respect. Saturday morning, while repairing a copier, I remembered the state lottery drawing had been the night before. Over lunch, I checked the results online. No winners. Maybe next time. I worked until evening, grabbed dinner, and stopped at a bar for a beer. Too tired to wait for the Powerball drawing, I went to bed. Sunday morning, I serviced another machine and checked the Powerball results during lunch. Nothing again. Back home Wednesday morning, I dropped by the office briefly, then returned to the house. Lila had taken a few things. The kitchen table, but not the stools. The space felt emptier, but manageable. On the counter, I found 2 envelopes. One held divorce papers, the other listed everything she'd taken. I was annoyed to see she'd cleared out our entire bedroom. The king-size bed, dressers, nightstands, and even the lamps. Upstairs, the room was bare. It stung a little, but at least now I knew what I was dealing with. In the guest room, I found my clothes neatly organized, shirts in the dresser, suits in the closet. On the nightstand was a note from Lila. Oliver, I hope this arrangement works. I've moved into an apartment and didn't want to spend much on furniture. You might want a smaller bed now that you're alone. Honestly, I hope to find someone who'll share mine and actually be there every night. The loneliness when you were away got to be too much. I know I didn't help with expenses, and maybe that wasn't fair. But I needed to save for this moment. If you think it's worth suing me, go ahead. I stopped touching our accounts 3 days before I told you I was leaving. That seemed fair. Brenda thinks I'm making a mistake, but she has Jim and their kids to keep her grounded. We never had that. I could say I still love you, but I don't think I do. I'm fond of you, though. Lila. I went downstairs to the spotless kitchen. The refrigerator was empty but cleaned out. The divorce papers were on the counter, just as she'd described, with a stamped envelope for my reply. I signed them and slipped them into the envelope. Through the window, I saw the lawn needed mowing, the flower beds needed weeding, and the sprinklers hadn't been turned on. Lila had always wanted the house to look perfect, but most of the upkeep had fallen on me. One day, I'd tear out those flower beds and replace them with grass. A bigger mower would make quick work of it. But not today. That evening, I went out for dinner. Watching other diners, I saw couples at different stages of love or conflict, families managing bratty or well-behaved kids. I wondered what kind of parents Lila and I might have been if we'd started a family. Afterward, I stopped by Miles's for a beer and bought some scratch tickets along with numbers for the lottery and Powerball. Suckers born every minute, Miles teased. Maybe, I said, but you still sell them. We sat down to talk, and I filled Miles in on the divorce. He'd known me since my teenage years, though Lila had never quite warmed to him. So what's next? Miles asked, leaning forward. No plans yet, I admitted. I've got some work to do on the house, but selling it might be smarter. With the mortgage, though, I wouldn't get much out of it. You need a roommate, someone to share the expenses, he suggested. I don't know if I could trust someone, I said with a bitter laugh. I trusted Lila, and look where that got me. Even now, though, I know she's being fair. She's not trying to screw me over. Miles studied me for a moment. Do you still love her? I shook my head. Not really. It's more of an inconvenience than anything else. More customers came in, and our conversation ended. I headed home to bed. The next morning, I mowed the lawn, but left the flower beds alone. The neighbors didn't seem to know Lila was gone. A few stopped to chat, but no one mentioned her. Later, I returned to Miles's for another Powerball ticket. Still no winners, he said. The prize is getting serious. Same numbers, one scratch ticket, I said. Scratching it, I won $10. Are you ahead on these tickets? Miles asked, smirking. I am, actually, I replied. But I'm waiting until the divorce is final before I let anyone know how far ahead I am. Lila wouldn't cause trouble, but why risk it? Friday and Saturday came and went with no lottery wins. By Sunday, I replaced my old tickets with new ones for the upcoming drawings. Dust was starting to collect in the house, and it smelled stale. Could I live with it? For now, I'd have to. That evening, I made sure no food would spoil while I was away. Around 8, Brenda called. How's it going, Oliver? She asked. Not bad, I replied. A bit more work around here, but I'm managing. How's Lila adjusting? She's doing well, Brenda said. Goes out with coworkers a lot and likes her apartment, though expenses are higher than she expected. I think she went on a date, nothing serious, but she's still waking up alone, which, let's be honest, seemed to be her biggest complaint when you were around. That'll change eventually, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. I just hope she doesn't settle for less than she deserves. Typical Oliver, Brenda teased with a laugh. Too nice for your own good. Thanks, Brenda. Love you too, I said with a chuckle. Say hi to Jim for me. Maybe he can sneak out for a beer sometime. Come by and see the kids. They miss you, she said warmly. And don't forget, bread and beer for chop suey on Thursday. Deal, I said with a laugh. Monday morning, I flew out for work. By Tuesday, the state lottery had been won, not by me. The Powerball jackpot had grown to over $150 million. Miles would be happy to keep selling me tickets regardless. Thursday evening, I joined Brenda's family for dinner. Lila was there too, and we exchanged polite updates about our lives. Her kids were thrilled to see me and made me promise to visit more often. As I was leaving, Lila walked me to my car. How are you holding up? She asked. I know leaving was a shock. It was, I admitted, but I get it. If what you felt wasn't enough to wait for me to be home more, then this was the right call. I miss you, but mostly for the day-to-day things like doing dishes together or the little closeness we shared. Those things can be replaced in time. Happiness comes and goes. I'm just waiting to see what's next. She smiled faintly. Thanks, Oliver. I was afraid I'd hurt you too much. I even considered inviting you over if I had. That's unnecessary, I said. I'll be fine. Good, she replied. I'm glad we talked. I think we can both move forward more comfortably now. I kissed her cheek, got in my car, and didn't look back. Later, while at Miles's place, I bought tickets for the next lottery and Powerball drawings, then prepared for another day of yard work. The next morning, Miles called. "Oliver, you said you needed a housekeeper. I found one. She'll be there tomorrow night, if you're okay with it." "Miles, I'm managing fine," I said, brushing off the suggestion. "But I'll think about it." "She's had bad luck," Miles continued. "She's a war widow with 2 kids and is being evicted next week. She needs a break." "How old is she?" I asked, curious despite myself. 25, he replied. "She used to be so cheerful, but life's been hard. Her husband died in the service, and her parents are barely scraping by to help her. She just needs a chance." I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. "Why is this my responsibility?" "Because it's a win-win, Oliver," Miles said confidently. "Trust me." "Fine," I relented. "I'll talk to her." "What's her name?" "Eva Brown. She'll be there at 6, maybe take her to dinner," Miles suggested. "Don't push it," I replied with a groan. I returned to my quiet, empty house, pushing thoughts of the woman I was supposed to meet to the back of my mind. I imagined her as a petite, slightly curvy woman, maybe 5'3". I arrived at Miles's bar early for our meeting. A few people came and went, but none matched the description. Then a tall woman, almost my height at 5'11", entered. Slim and graceful, she moved with an elegance that caught my attention. She spoke to the bartender, her voice smooth and pleasant. I noticed her glance my way a few times before our eyes met. She smiled faintly, acknowledging me. "When's Miles supposed to be here?" she asked the bartender. "He said he'd introduce me to someone." "Miles is running late," the bartender replied. "Do you know their name?" "Oliver Grant," she said. Hearing this, I got up and approached her. "Eva Brown?" I asked. "I'm Oliver. Let's grab a booth." She nodded politely. "Sure," I gestured to the bartender. "Bring my beer over and refill her glass." Then I led Eva to a booth. "So," I began. Knowing Miles, I bet his description of me was far from accurate. Eva laughed lightly. "He said you were the most handsome man I'd ever meet, that your wife left you and you were heartbroken. He thought my kids and I could save you from despair." Classic Miles, I chuckled. "Here's the truth. My wife did leave me, but I'm far from devastated. I'm just looking for someone to help with housekeeping. If you're in a tough spot, a live-in arrangement could work, but most of your compensation would be the living situation itself." "And what did Miles tell you about me?" I asked. "He said you were cute, recently single, and needed help around the house. He also mentioned I'm a war widow with 2 kids and about to be evicted." "Sounds exaggerated," I said. "It is," she admitted with a wry smile. "I lost my husband, but I'm not destitute. I have insurance money. The city is tearing down my building for luxury apartments, so yes, I do need a place. My kids are 7 and 6, well-behaved and smart. A stable home would be great, but I'm not desperate. The city promised to relocate us." "I heard you tell the bartender you couldn't stay long because of your kids," I said. "That's right," Eva replied. "I promised them McDonald's tonight. It's a treat since I prefer cooking at home. I'm a pretty good cook." She caught me glancing at her chest and smiled knowingly. "I don't have much of a figure," she said without embarrassment. "I eat a lot, but I have a high metabolism. Cooking is just my way of indulging my appetite." "Let's go to McDonald's then," I suggested. "I haven't eaten yet, and I'd like to meet the kids." After dinner, I took Ava and her kids to my house. She admired the flower beds, even stopping to pull a weed as we walked around. I explained my travel schedule, usually 3 days a week, with notice in advance. Inside, I showed her the bedrooms. She said, "If we move in, I'll need a full bed and a twin in the master bedroom. I don't want my daughter sharing my bed, even if we share a room. Logan can take the spare room." She hesitated, so I addressed the unspoken question. "You're wondering if I'd expect Zex?" She nodded. "I'm not interested in a physical relationship right now," I said. "I've always respected boundaries, and I will here too. If this arrangement works, we need to be clear up front." "Okay," she said. "So I handle everything except closeness, and you pay for everything, like with Lila?" "Pretty much," I replied. "I'll leave $500 for incidentals and get you a credit card by Thursday. If you use your own money, I'll reimburse you." "This feels like I'm getting the better deal," she said. "But I'll cover half the food. The kids eat, and you're not always here." "Fair enough," I agreed. She smirked. "You're paying and not even getting any affection?" "All I need is respect," I said. "I didn't get much affection in my marriage anyway." "Let's change the subject," she said. "This is outside my comfort zone." "Sure," I said. "I'll take you home. Show me your beds in Tinkerbell to see if they're suitable or if we need new ones." "Tinkerbell is Teresa's nickname," Eva explained, smiling. The name fit perfectly. Her daughter had an undeniable charm her mother lacked, though Eva's confidence was appealing in its own way. Later, I went to the bar around 10:30. "Miles, give me a scratch ticket," I said. "Let's see if Eva Brown brings me luck." When he handed it over, I gave it back. "You scratch it. I bet you another ticket it's a winner." It was a $50 win. Begrudgingly, Miles bought another ticket to honor the bet. That one was a dud. "Oliver, you're a lucky prick," he said, laughing. Then he asked, "Is Eva working for you?" I dodged. "Miles, you told plenty of lies about me and about her. We compared notes." "Well, did she move in or not?" "Miles, you've got a customer," I said, pointing toward the bar. I waved and walked out before the state lottery drawing. I didn't stop by Saturday. On Sunday, I came in early to buy tickets for the state lottery and Powerball. Miles wasn't there, so he still didn't know if Ava had decided to move in. Monday morning, I left for a short trip, driving instead of flying, and returned Wednesday evening. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed an old Camry. Ava must be here. Inside, the smell of pot roast greeted me. Ava was taking a Dutch oven off the stove. "Hi," she said. "Go wash up and grab us a beer. I called Miles to find out what you drink. Genesee Light. Tried it myself. Not bad, though sweet." The table was set with floral dishes I didn't recognize. "Where did these come from?" I asked. "Wedding gift," she said quietly. "Barely used them. My husband's gone, and the meaning went with him. Time to move on. These will be our everyday dishes now." Her steady voice carried a hint of emotion. "They're beautiful," I said, admiring the arrangement. "And the flowers?" "From the backyard," she replied with a small smile. "Thought they'd brighten the table." "They do," I said, glancing around. "Something smells amazing. Pot roast with onions, carrots, and potatoes," she said. "Sit tight, I'll grab the kids. And don't start without us. We always say grace before dinner." "I like that," I said, nodding. The kids were shy but polite as they joined us. As I looked around, something clicked. "Wait, this table wasn't here Monday." Ava smiled. "We moved in this week. Beds are set up. Tonight's our first night here." "Good," I said. "I wondered when you'd make the move." Toward the end of dinner, Logan spoke up. "You have a huge TV." "It is," I said. "I used to have a smaller one in the bedroom, but my wife took it when we split." "You have a wife?" Tinkerbell asked innocently. "Therese," Eva said, embarrassed. "That's not our business." "It's okay," I said. "Her name's Lila. We grew apart and decided to separate. She wanted me home every night, but my work made that hard. You might meet her someday." "Is she pretty?" Tinkerbell asked. "She is," I said. "There's an album under the TV if you want to see her pictures." The kids excitedly retrieved the album, flipping through photos of Lila. Tinkerbell glanced between the pictures and her mom, clearly noticing the contrast. "Who's this with the kids?" she asked, pointing to another photo. "My sister-in-law Brenda and her family. They visit often, so you'll have playmates," I explained. "Brenda's a great cook, like your mom. Lila wasn't much into cooking. Tonight's meal was one of the best I've ever had." After dinner, I helped Eva clear the table while the kids watched TV. As we worked, she glanced over at me. "That was the nicest thing you could have said. Was your wife really that bad a cook?" "She wasn't bad," I said with a chuckle. "But she didn't enjoy it, so we ate out a lot." I wasn't lying. This was incredible. "Thank you," she said softly, a faint smile touching her lips. "It's good to feel like I'm good at something. Kids shouldn't think someone else is prettier or better than their mom." "I can't say Lila wasn't pretty," I admitted. "But beauty isn't everything." Eva looked at me curiously. "Do you really believe that?" "I do," I said, nodding. "I dated a girl in high school who wasn't conventionally attractive, but she was the kindest, smartest person I knew. Her husband's lucky. He got a gem." Eva smiled. "I'm learning new things about you." "Let's sit on the patio," I suggested. Later, tired from travel, I watched a crime show but fell asleep halfway through. Heading to bed, I relished the feel of fresh sheets for the first time in weeks. Thursday morning, I took Eva and the kids downtown. At the bank, I added her name to my credit card, which had an $11,000 limit. I always paid off my balance and handled money carefully. New cards were issued in both our names, set to arrive soon. Outside, Eva looked at me, surprised. "Why did you do that? I expected a $700 limit, not this." What happens if the cellar floods, the furnace breaks, or you need to stay in a motel while I'm away? I replied. This is my house, and I'm responsible for everything in it, including you and the kids. End of discussion. Softening my tone, I added, that said, I hope we don't need the full limit because funds are tight until my upcoming raise. The card gives me flexibility, though, so use it if necessary. Was your wife's name on your card? She asked. No, I said. She had her own for emergencies, but rarely used it. I paid all the bills anyway, which made things simpler when she left. Ava didn't respond, but gave me a small smile that spoke volumes. I had to work that afternoon, but tomorrow would be a full day off. By next week, I expected all of us, Eva, Logan, Tinkerbell, and me, to feel fully settled. Tomorrow evening, I'd like to meet your parents, I told Eva, and maybe leave the kids with them for a bit. I want to let Miles know we're officially living together. Sure, Eva said. My parents will want to know how you're treating their grandkids. Guess I'll have to behave then, I said with a grin. You've already made a good impression, she replied. Kids are trusting, and so am I. You'd have to work hard to lose that. Later, we stopped by Miles's bar. He greeted us with mock frustration. Christ, Oliver, I never see you anymore. What can I get you? A beer for me, I said, and a red wine spritzer for Eva. Half wine, half ginger ale. Eva smiled. Okay, I trust you're not trying to get me drunk. Yet. Miles smirked. Give him time. I scratched a lottery ticket on a whim and won $5, enough to cover our drinks. Miles groaned dramatically. He's gonna break me. Afterward, we visited Eva's parents, a warm couple in their 50s. Her dad was tall and slim like Ava, while her mom was short and curvy. I accidentally stared at her mom's chest and she laughed. Don't feel bad. They've always been a distraction, she joked. Not that my husband complains. Mom, stop, Eva groaned. I'd rather have my figure than your backaches. We left soon after, as the kids were getting tired. Back home, I carried Logan to bed while Eva tucked in Tinkerbell. Once they were asleep, I settled in to watch a country music show featuring Dolly Parton. Eva walked in, catching me staring. You're drooling, she teased. What is it with men and bosoms? Mine worked fine for nursing, thank you very much. Later, she returned, smiling. Mom's wondering how I'm going to get you to marry me. She even joked that she wished she were single. I laughed. What about your dad? He thinks you're a good guy, but don't let it go to your head. I'm just your housekeeper. You're more than that, I said. You've been here a week, and I already feel more comfortable than I have in years. I hope this stays just the way it is. Eva gave me a strange look, but said nothing. Was she unsure of where this was going, or was she hoping for more? I couldn't tell. For the first part of the week, I was home each evening. Dinner was ready when I arrived, and the kids were over the moon about the new swing set and jungle gym in the backyard. They dragged me outside, insisting I watch them play. The yard looked immaculate, the lawn freshly mowed, and the flower beds neat and vibrant. You've done a lot, I remarked, impressed. I have the time, Ava replied with a shrug. Work's slow right now. You freelance, right? I asked. Yes, she said. I edit articles for magazines. It's all remote and work comes in waves. Not scrambling for rent has been a huge relief. Will you be home Friday evening? She asked after a pause. Yes, why? I replied. I have a dinner date, she said, almost hesitantly. And I was hoping you could watch the kids. I should be back by 11. A sharp pang of jealousy hit me, but I kept my tone light. Of course, I'll order pizza, and we'll have a party. You don't mind? She asked, her tone soft. Not at all, I said, forcing a smile. That night, I slept poorly and blamed my bad mood at breakfast on a tough repair job. On Friday, I came home early to find Eva dressed to impress. Black dress, styled hair, and a noticeable enhancement to her chest. She looked stunning. You look great, I said. I know, she replied with a grin. I feel like a queen. Maybe I'll do this more often. As the pizza arrived, so did her date, a man about 10 years older with a polished look and a Mercedes parked outside. Eva seemed flustered as she introduced him. Oliver, this is Richard Tromley, my boss. He's been very kind to me and occasionally asks me out. Oliver Grant, I said, shaking his hand. Eva turned to me. The kids need to be in bed on time. I might be late, so don't wait up. Bye. As she left, a wave of jealousy and hurt hit me. Unexpected and unwelcome. Not even Lila's outings had made me feel this way. I reminded myself that Eva was just my housekeeper, nothing more. To distract myself, I called Brenda. Hey, I installed some swings in the backyard. Bring Simon and Pearl over to try them out. Not tonight, she replied. What's new with you? Not much, I said. The kids belong to my housekeeper. She's out on a date, and I'm babysitting. Why aren't you dating your housekeeper? Brenda asked. Lila's dating, isn't she? Not a chance, I said firmly. I wouldn't mix business with personal life. You've always wanted kids, though, she pointed out. These two are great, I admitted. Polite, well-mannered, and so easy to get along with. But I've got to go. It's bath time. They sleep at your house? Brenda asked, sounding surprised. Eva and Tinkerbell share my room. Logan's in the spare and I'm in the guest room, I explained. You're holding back, she said with a laugh. I need to meet this woman. Fire up the grill tomorrow and we'll come over. Sure, come by at 3, I said, laughing. Later, I watched Shrek with the kids before tucking them in. As I leaned down to kiss Tinkerbell goodnight, she wrapped her arms around me. Oliver, my friend says her daddy kisses her goodnight. Mommy kisses me, but she says nobody kisses her. I think she'd like it if you kissed her too. I smiled. Maybe, sweetheart. Sleep tight. I went downstairs to wait for Eva, but by midnight I gave up and went to bed. When she finally came in at 1:30, I stayed in my room, my thoughts racing. Was she making out with him? Did they go to a motel? It wasn't my business, but it gnawed at me anyway. Saturday morning I grabbed breakfast at IHOP and went to the office, even though it was the weekend. At 10 a.m., I called home. Where are you? Eva asked. I wanted to tell you about last night. It was wonderful. Sorry, had work to do, I replied. How about lunch? My sister-in-law and her family are coming over for a cookout tonight. I'm picking up steaks. You'll need salads, Eva said. We have some ingredients, but grab more beer and 3 quarts of strawberries from the farmer's market. I'll make shortcake. There was a pause. Is she as pretty as your wife? Check the photo album, I said. There are pictures of her with Jim and the kids at the beach. I haven't looked past the photos of your wife, Eva admitted. When I got home, Eva had tomato soup and a cucumber sandwich waiting for me. I hoped you'd still be awake when I got home, she said. The meeting went late, but it was amazing. The authors I've been editing for all thanked me, and I even got an award for being the most dedicated part-time editor. We had a 5-course meal, shared funny stories, and danced until midnight. I should have called, but I knew you and the kids were fine. Relief and embarrassment washed over me. You didn't say it was a meeting. I thought it was a date with your boss. Eva frowned. You thought that? Why? All you said was a date, I explained. Then you dressed up, left with a guy in a nice car, and said you'd be home by 11, but you didn't get back until 1:30. Next time, give me more details so I don't worry. Her expression softened. I'm sorry, she said gently. I was so excited I didn't think to explain. A small smile crept onto her face. You were worried about me? No, I muttered, looking away. You're a grown woman. I can take care of myself, she said, her voice light, but it's sweet that you cared. To change the subject, I flipped through some photos of Brenda. She's gorgeous, I said casually, then added, but not as gorgeous as you looked last night. Ava's smile widened. I'll marinate the steaks while you clean the grill, she said, turning toward the counter. As we worked together in the kitchen, she teased, Tinkerbell told me you kissed her goodnight. She thought it was wonderful. I worried you might think it was inappropriate, I admitted. Not at all, Eva said warmly. I'd have been disappointed if you hadn't. She's missed having a father around, and I see how you care for Logan, too. She paused, her eyes twinkling. I think I owe Miles a kiss for introducing us. I thought to myself, what about kissing me? That afternoon, Brenda and Eva hit it off, and soon I was seeing more of Simon and Pearl at the house. Sometimes it was just Eva greeting me when I got home. One day I bumped into Lila at the grocery store. We ended up chatting for over an hour. Oliver, she said eventually, her tone candid, I moved out almost 3 months ago and I'm happy. I've met someone and we're thinking about moving in together. Is that going to bother you? Not at all, I replied with a shrug. My life's pretty settled. You're probably getting more Zex than I am, but other than that, I'm good. Lila laughed, shaking her head. Brenda says you could be getting it from your housekeeper if you try. She likes you and thinks Eva might be the one for you. Whatever, Lila, I said, brushing it off. I'm just glad you found someone. She grinned, then added, Oh, and by the way, that raise I promised you, it starts next week. Plus, I got promoted, so I'll be sleeping in my own bed every night now. Too late for me, I said. I've moved on. She smiled. The best thing you can do is pull that woman into your bedroom. You'd have all the good things we had early on. Too bad it took 6 years to figure out we weren't meant for each other. Invite me to your wedding, I joked. Only 3 months left until the divorce is final. Feels like forever. Take care, Oliver, she said. You know, you were a better husband to me than I was a wife to you. I'll see you around. As she walked away, I thought about our 6 years together. Surprisingly, I didn't miss her at all. Friday night, I stopped by Miles's bar for my usual tickets and bought a scratch-off. For the first time in ages, I didn't win, even my money back. Has my luck finally run out? I muttered. Miles wandered over, laughing. All downhill from here, Oliver. How much have you won lately? At least $2,000 in the last few months, maybe more, I said. I'll figure it out at tax time. Damn fool, he said. I wouldn't declare at all. I laughed. Oops, forget I said that. Miles smirked. Go home and tell Eva you're losing your streak. While you're at it, when are you going to get in bed with her? She needs it as much as you do. Might as well make it sooner than later. Screw you, Miles, I shot back. That's what Lila said to me earlier. Hey, bring Eva in more often. It's fun ganging up on you. At home, I overheard Eva talking to her mom in the living room. The kids were staying at her parents' house. Oliver is the best thing that's happened to me, Mom, she said. I loved my kid's father, but I think I love Oliver more. Her mother replied, and Eva laughed softly. I can't just slip into bed with him. He'd kick me out the moment he woke up. I decided to surprise her. Walking in, I slid my hands under her arms, startling her. When she spun around, I kissed her deeply. The kids are gone tonight, I whispered. Any ideas for how we can spend the evening? Plenty, Eva replied, pulling off her blouse to reveal a silky undergarment. She paused, searching my face. Oliver, are you sure? I don't want to be just a fling. I'm not asking for forever, but I don't want to be your plaything either. Then, throwing her hands up, she said, Oh hell, take me to bed. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. We didn't make it upstairs right away. The moment overtook us. Later, we ended up in her bed, where I woke the next morning feeling happier than I had in years. In the kitchen, I made coffee. Eva joined me, sinking into a chair. Me too, please, she said. After a pause, she asked hesitantly, Do you love me? I know what you said last night, but it's morning now. I do, I said. I love you, I love the kids, and I love having you here. I meant every word. She smiled softly. What time do you need to pick up the kids? In a few minutes, she said with a sigh. Not enough time. Hey, I said, we've got the next 50 or 60 years. Too bad we can't sleep together tonight, she teased. We can, she replied. Brenda says the kids can stay with her any time. Do you mind? She asked. Not at all. It'll stop Brenda from nagging me to make love to you. Eva laughed. By the way, I'm getting a raise starting Monday. That's great, I said. But we're doing fine already. You and the kids haven't been a burden. Not at all, she said. In fact, I'm better off than when Lila left. And there's more. I'll only be traveling for work about once a month now. Eva's smile glowed as she looked at me, her love radiating through the room. The kids will be so happy, she said. They love having you home every night. Honestly, I can understand why Lila struggled with you being away so much. I hate it when you're gone. The house feels empty. She paused, then added, I don't think we should tell the kids we're sleeping together yet, but they'll see how happy I am. That'll make them happy too. Do you want me to pick them up this morning? I asked. No, I'll go, she replied. I want to tell Mom about last night. Are you sure that's a good idea? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Absolutely, she replied with a confident smile. As she left, I poured another coffee and turned on the TV. A news report caught my eye. Miles's bar sold one of the 2 winning tickets for the $3.2 million state lottery. The winners would each get $1.6 million. My heart skipped a beat. Oh, crap, I muttered. Miles knew my numbers. Would he keep quiet? Probably, at least until I talked to him. Should I tell Eva? Not yet, especially since I hadn't even mentioned the $25,000 scratch ticket still sitting in my bank. I dumped my coffee, grabbed a beer, and was on my third by the time Eva and the kids returned. She eyed me suspiciously. You never drink in the morning. What's going on? Just celebrating, I said. Who's hungry? I'll make cheese omelets. Sit down, Oliver, she said with a laugh. You can scramble the eggs. For some reason, that struck me as hilarious, and I burst out laughing. The kids stared in confusion as I tried to explain, but my words turned to babble. Eva joined in the laughter. The mood stayed lighthearted for the rest of the day. That evening, I announced, I'm heading to Miles's for a scratch ticket. I promise, no beer. Eva grinned. Have a beer. Celebrate last night and this morning. Just come home early. Maybe I'll let you hold my hand. She had no idea what else I was celebrating. At Miles's, the bar was packed. When he saw me, Miles grinned. Oliver, you've put my place on the map. This is the biggest payout the city's ever had, and I sold one of the tickets. Everyone's talking about it. Do you have to tell anyone who won? I asked quietly. I don't want to claim it until after the first of the year, for tax reasons. No worries, Miles said. I get a bonus for selling it, so I'm happy to keep quiet. But people are going to speculate. Does Eva know? No, and don't tell her, I said. I want to court her properly. Money shouldn't factor into it. Miles smirked. Hell, Oliver, you don't have to court her. Take her to bed. That's all she needs. He studied me, then grinned. Son of a witch. You already have, haven't you? Congrats, you two are perfect for each other. I scratched the ticket. $2. Feeling smug, I went home without beer on my breath. Life settled into a happy routine. The kids went to school, Eva's freelance work picked up, and my job gave me more responsibility. I was home almost every night, and we were all better for it. On my 20th birthday, Lila dropped by to introduce her boyfriend, Thomas Davis. He worked in construction, hardly the kind of job I thought would appeal to someone like Lila, but the way they looked at each other made it clear they were smitten. During the party, whispers began circulating that Eva and I had become more than friends. I had a strong hunch Eva's mother was the one who spread the news. When Lila was leaving, she paused and said, Your housekeeper's kids are delightful. Honestly, I wouldn't have imagined you and Eva as a couple, but you both seem content. Is this serious? It is, I replied. Living in the city and coming home every night brought us closer. We both get why you left, and I'm genuinely happy for you and Thomas. She smiled and teased. All right, that secures you an invite to our wedding. Everything was going well until a work trip stirred up unexpected trouble. My secretary, Vivian, a strikingly attractive young woman, had to come along. In the chaos of preparing, I asked her to swing by my place to grab my luggage. That one errand set off Eva's jealousy, though I didn't realize the extent of it until I returned 2 days later. Eva's frosty demeanor and sharp tone made it obvious something was wrong. Later that night, when the kids were asleep, I knocked softly on her door. What do you need? She asked, her voice cold. I need you, I said simply. You're upset. I've been gone for 2 days and I missed you. Then kiss me and leave me alone, she snapped. I'm tired. Eva, I said, exasperated. I love you. Tell me what's bothering you so I can make it right. You think I wouldn't care that you went off with a young, gorgeous woman who practically oozes flirtation? She shot back. Wait, I interrupted, startled. Where's this coming from? She told me you two had connecting rooms, she said bitterly. Yes, we did, I admitted. But remember when you went out with your boss and I jumped to all the wrong conclusions? This is no different. I get how you feel, unsure and hurt, but it's not what you think. I reached for her hand, guiding her toward my room. Slowly I began undressing, letting my actions speak louder than words. Eva stood still for a moment, then hesitantly allowed me to help her out of her clothes. Oliver, she said quietly, don't lie to me, please. I wouldn't, I assured her, but let me tell you something about Vivian. She flirts a lot, and there's a very specific reason why. Her brow furrowed. What are you saying? I should have been more concerned about her meeting you than the other way around, I said with a smirk. It took her a moment to catch my meaning. You're serious? She asked, her expression shifting. Completely, I replied. When we first started working together, Vivian confided in me. She's attracted to women. She even asked if I'd have an issue with it. I told her I didn't, as long as she stayed professional. To keep things simple, she plays the part of a flirt with men to deflect attention from the women she's actually interested in. I hesitated before adding, I've even met her girlfriend Sophie, who's as stunning as Vivian. Sophie works in another department. To my knowledge, I'm the only one who knows about them. Yes, we shared connecting rooms, but only so I could work at night after our meetings. Ava's tension eased, though a shadow of doubt lingered. You were worried about me and Vivian? Not even a little, I said. I trust you completely. As for Vivian, well, let's say I trust her 95% of the time. She'll probably joke at our wedding about how you stole me from her. Eva chuckled softly. I won't let jealousy get the better of me again. The last couple of days were awful. I've never felt that kind of heartache. Smiling, I leaned in. Set your alarm. I plan to spend the night right here. We planned our wedding for the last Saturday in November, a cozy 10 a.m. ceremony at Miles's bar. Miles, ever generous, let us use the space for the reception until 4 p.m. Brenda was matron of honor, with Tinkerbell and Pearl as her attendants. Miles stood beside me as my best man, joined by Logan and Simon. The celebration was intimate, but full of warmth. My family was small, and Eva's parents were her only relatives, but the love in the room made up for it. Eva invited a few colleagues from the magazine, including her boss and his wife, who found it hilarious that I'd once been jealous of him. Brenda and Jim brought their kids and couldn't have been happier to be included, which only strengthened our bond with them. Lila RSVP'd with a note that she and Thomas Davis, now her husband, would attend. She signed it, Mrs. Thomas Davis, casually revealing they'd tied the knot at City Hall 2 days earlier. So much for that wedding invite she promised us. The most memorable discovery Eva and I made together was our mutual love for the polka. After some practice, we found that dancing wasn't just fun, it became a shared passion that brought us closer. At the reception, Vivian and her girlfriend Sophie were indulging in drinks, with Vivian as playfully flirtatious as always. She intercepted me on my way back from the restroom. "Oliver," she said with a mischievous grin, "dance with me, I need your advice." The band had started playing a waltz by the time we reached the floor. Vivian, tipsy and unsteady, leaned heavily on me as we moved. "What's on your mind, Vivian?" I asked. "Sophie thinks it's time for me to come out," she blurted. "She wants me to make it public. Would it ruin your wedding if I used a toast to make the announcement?" "Not at all," I assured her. "But you realize once it's out there, there's no taking it back." "I know," she said with determination. "We're heading to Massachusetts over New Year's to get married, so people might as well know now." "Then grab Sophie and meet me at the head table," I told her. I clinked a knife against my glass to get everyone's attention and stood between Vivian and Sophie. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "I have a special announcement. As many of you know, Vivian has long been the heartbreaker of our office, the one everyone secretly hopes to win over. Well, she's finally chosen her partner, which means the rest of us can give up our fantasies. Today, I'm thrilled to share that she's officially engaged." I stepped back and added, "Vivian, care to show everyone who you love?" The room fell silent as Vivian leaned in and kissed Sophie. After a beat, applause erupted, though someone muttered, "What a waste." The sentiment was drowned out by the cheers that followed. Grinning, I said, "Congratulations. Now how about a hug?" Vivian hugged me tightly, standing on her toes to kiss my cheek while Ava joined in, embracing Vivian as I turned to congratulate Sophie. Soon, a line of well-wishers formed, showering the couple with warm words and laughter. Later that evening, after a few more dances, I turned to Eva and said, "Time to wrap this up. We've got 6 whole days of honeymoon ahead." Before we left, Lila approached Ava, the two sharing a warm exchange. Then Lila turned to me. "One last dance, ex-husband?" she asked with a playful smile. "Why not?" I said, taking her hand. As we danced, Lila said, "I've been meaning to tell you. Leaving you was the right choice for both of us. You seem genuinely happy, and so am I. But when I first met Ava, I felt sorry for you. I thought she wasn't much to look at. Now I see how wrong I was. She's radiant, and Ryan says she's a better dancer than I ever was." "As one ex to another," she added. "Don't ask me why, but I think she's perfect for you." "Thanks, Lila," I replied. "I wish you the best." "Friends?" she asked. "Always," I said. Before leaving Miles's, I picked up a scratch ticket at the counter. It won me $5, a fitting end to the day. Married life with Eva turned out to be far better than anything I'd experienced with Lila. Eva treated me with a respect I hadn't known before, and we found joy in building a life together. When Vivian and Sophie returned from their wedding, they radiated happiness, as newlyweds do. The office missed Vivian's usual antics, but everyone was genuinely happy for her. However, Vivian struggled a little with the lack of attention she once commanded. She and Sophie spent a lot of time with Eva, which initially made Eva a bit uneasy. "They're just adjusting," I reassured her. "Being open about their relationship is new for them, and they're leaning on us for support. Once they settle in, things will change." Ava seemed relieved and nodded. One evening, I decided to share a long-kept secret. Sitting beside Ava on the couch, I took her hand. "Ava," I began, "you've been managing our finances since we got married. How much do you think we're worth? I've been thinking about adding a few rooms to the house." She gave me a curious look and retrieved her accounting journal. "We started the year with this," she said, pointing to a column. "By February, it was this, and if my projections are right, we'll end the year here. I leaned back and smiled. Add $80,000 to that, I said casually. She blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. What are you talking about? Remember when Miles sold a lottery ticket that no one claimed? I asked. I have that ticket. It's in the bank, and tomorrow we're cashing it in. Her jaw dropped. Are you serious? Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to complicate things, I explained. When I won, I was still getting over Lila and trying to figure things out with you. I also didn't want Lila thinking she had a claim on it since our divorce wasn't finalized at the time. How much is it worth? She asked, her eyes widening. $80,000 a year for 20 years, minus taxes, I said calmly. She let out a whistle. What will we do with all that money? Will it change us? Not me, I said. I love my work and the life we've built. Same here, she said with a grin. But I won't lie, I'm excited. Get ready for attention, I warned. Your picture in the paper, reporters, charities, even distant relatives. She laughed. No wonder you kept quiet. Winning must have given you courage that night. You came home and couldn't keep your hands off me. I chuckled. It might have helped. A month later, the excitement faded and life returned to normal. Still, I kept buying scratch-offs and Powerball tickets. Why bother? Eva teased one evening. Lightning doesn't strike twice. Buy a whole roll if you're going to keep playing. Scratch tickets almost pay for themselves, I said. It feels like bad luck to stop. Life was good, the house was cozy, and we loved our neighborhood. Monthly gatherings with friends and family became a tradition. Even Lila occasionally visited, maintaining friendly ties. Then Brenda shared news. Lila and Thomas were expecting, but Thomas had been injured in a fall and couldn't work. The neighborhood organized a baby shower to support them, including scratch tickets as gifts. That sparked something in me. I remembered the $25,000 winning ticket I had stashed away, uncashed since before I met Ava. That evening, I decided to bring it up. Ava, there's something I need to tell you, I said, hesitating for a moment. It's about money. And Lila. Her curiosity was piqued. Go on. The night Lila asked for a divorce, I bought a scratch ticket, I explained. It won $25,000, but I never cashed it. It expires in 2 months. Eva tilted her head, considering. Do you want Lila to know it's from you? Not at all, I said. That's why I'm giving it to you. You decide. She smiled warmly. Go get it. And grab 5 fresh tickets from Miles. I'll include them all in an envelope for the shower. Lila will never suspect. The baby shower was a success. That evening, Ava returned glowing. Lila cried, she said. At first, she didn't understand the scratch ticket, but when we cashed them at Miles's, the total was $27,304. It'll hold them over until Thomas can work again. No one suspects you gave her the big one. Her eyes sparkled. I have my own news. I hope it makes you as happy as it's made me. What is it? She smiled softly. I took a pregnancy test this morning. It's positive. Joy washed over me. I hugged her tightly, overwhelmed. Later, as we stepped out of the shower, she added casually, Oh, Miles said to check the Powerball numbers tonight. Apparently, it's a $275 million jackpot. Where's your ticket?